Sorry, I realize that our first item of business, which I will get to after I read everything, is the nomination of vice chair. And I know that Councilmember Valdemoros and Councilmember Wharton may be late. So I certainly don't want to do that without them.
Maybe we could switch the agenda items and go to the administration's report first.
Okay.
And just go back to that item when they're in the meeting.
Is that okay with you, Madam Mayor? Okay, thank you. In that case, let's get started. Welcome to today's City Council meeting. To help reduce the transmission of COVID-19, we have returned to holding our meetings virtually. This return to online meetings follows an increase in COVID-19 cases and updated mask requirements. We are closely monitoring the situation. The council will return with hybrid or in-person meetings when appropriate and safer for the public and city employees. As many of you know, there is no public comment during a work session. However, please join us remotely for the 7 p.m. formal meeting tonight to share any comments. Your feedback is always welcome, and you can share with the City Council anytime by mailing us at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or by calling our 24-hour phone comment line at 801-535-7654. We are switching up the agenda a little bit, and so as our first item of business, I'd like to turn the time over to Madam Mayor Mendenhall for an update from the administration. Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Taylor, for reading my mind. Can go on to the next one. Even though things have been feeling like they're dropping down, most of our numbers are up again this week, including our statewide cases, our daily cases, our referrals to the ICU, but the COVID utilization is down about 2.1 percentage points. And the total ICU utilization is up just a tiny bit. So I'm not sure if we can call this a stabilization, but it's still increasing in most categories across the board. Our next slide. We have had 6 children under 14 hospitalized just since yesterday. That's a total of 21 kids hospitalized this week, and 267 new cases just today. So we're at about 4 times the number of daily cases in this age range as we were at this time last year. Next slide, please. It's from here's from the county's dashboard on school districts, and you'll recall that this chart does not wait for or calculate the school populations, where Murray has about 6,500 students and we have 21,000. So I apologize that we don't have a population weighted window on the county's dashboard, but I'm happy to get you those population numbers if you want to do some math, and perhaps in our next update for you next week, we could do those calculations. Next slide. You will see about a 2% uptick in vaccination rates, where we'd kind of leveled out to barely 1%, if any, increase in early September and late August. So we are seeing greater vaccination rates happening in our most impacted parts of Salt Lake City. And we're up to almost 64% fully vaccinated as the capital city. Next slide. Here again are those ongoing countywide vaccination demographics. And the next slide. We have a few vaccination events coming up. Groove in the Grove is just fun anyway, so go to Groove in the Grove on Thursday. You can get vaccinated there. Pioneer Park will have vaccinations, and Glendale Community Learning Center on Friday. And then there's a 5K at Liberty Park. You don't actually have to run the 5K, but you can go get vaccinated there. Next slide. Here's an abrupt shift that is a segue in some ways to Andrew Johnston's part of our regular updates, and which you already know about, but that yesterday I initiated the pending ordinance change notification that is essentially a moratorium. It prohibits any applications for new permanent shelters in the city for 6 months, and it requires us as a city to review what conditions we can approve those conditional use permits for shelters in the future. We want to take into consideration in these months whether or not the city should distinguish between temporary and permanent shelters in our land use process, which we currently do not. And it doesn't prohibit, this action that I've taken doesn't prohibit the city from considering a potential temporary shelter location. We absolutely have an emergency winter shelter need of 300 beds that the coalition in the county has articulated that need, and we support that. And again, just reiterating that the initiation of this ordinance change does not prohibit the city from considering an application for a temporary location. I'm happy to take any questions, and I know Andrew is ready to go, and I believe the next slide is the beginning of his part of the presentation if you don't have questions.
Councilmember, are there any questions? I don't see any. Andrew, it's all yours.
Feel free to ask any questions as we go through and back up the slides if you need to. Here's the standard slide we had for quite a while now about the occupancy rates of the resource centers. Pretty typical with the Men's Resource Center in South Salt Lake running at 87% last week. Miller, the co-ed one at 95%, and the King at basically 100%, 99.6. Over 90% is essentially full for these folks because those beds are the beds that are not being occupied at 7 a.m. for that count are generally reserved for somebody who just doesn't make it in that night, or they were full at say midnight and somebody left between midnight and 7, which is pretty typical as well. So really they're at running at full capacity. Next slide. Resource fairs, there was a big one at Madsen Park on the 23rd, and you can see some of the numbers from that. A lot of outreach in there. Somebody went to Detox. One person went to the Rape Recovery Center as well. Workforce Services saw a bunch of folks. Advantage Services, we had Japanese Church of Christ, which was there, which is great. UTA also was there and gave out transit passes, which is a huge benefit. And then the health department did some vaccinations, and then also Rough Haven for pets, which is a big need out there as well. And then more cleanings, mostly along the Jordan River this week. One of the things you'll probably see, council members, if you haven't seen already, is there are fewer of these really large camps of over 20 structures or tents at one place, with the river being the exception at times. But there are a lot of smaller ones. And so a lot of these are being handled with the just Advantage Services being able to go out and clean around and through, trying to handle on smaller levels and more frequently through the city as we work on a permanent option for everybody. Next slide. This is the last slide. I wanted to bring this up today just for your information as a starting point to discuss one of the questions that's happened a lot recently at this body and other bodies I've been meeting with. There's a lot of discussion about what do you do with people who just don't want help, who say no to services. There's a lot of answers to that question. I want to bring up one particular piece to understand some of the mindset that comes behind those no's at times. It's an intersection between trauma and substance use, both of which are highly prevalent with folks who are unsheltered and even within the shelters. I'm not saying that folks in the shelters are actively using every day in there. They're not. But when they leave, sometimes they are. And it has a direct correlation to their trauma. What we knew at the Youth Resource Center for years was about 80% of those kids who came in had been abused in some capacity before they became homeless, physically, sexually, emotionally. We also knew from their self-report that after they became homeless, about 80% of them were abused post becoming homeless as well. It's a cycle that happens both in and outside the street. And so when you have trauma in your life, it impairs your decision making, your higher level functioning. You don't think through things in a rational way. You're very emotionally based. You see things in a very different way. It's very difficult to manage your emotions. That dysregulation happens. One of the things we don't talk a lot about is sleep. Sleep is very difficult for some folks to have based on trauma and based on being unsheltered sometimes. The lack of sleep alone will make you look like you have severe impairments. And then a general distrust. And this comes with, we keep asking, why won't they go into the resource centers? But if the Women's Resource Center is at 99% capacity, and we keep asking when you do want to go in, and they say, yeah, and we say, you can't go in, 2 or 3 times into that, you stop asking, and you stop saying yes. It's a useless sort of process for me to get any hopes up to think through that, because it's just going to be failure again. So there's some anger that comes in, and then it's a constant feeling of that trauma. It doesn't go away. It's like a shadow or a haunting where you don't feel safe anywhere. And for some of the folks we're talking about out there, they cannot tell you how many times they've been through abuse of all sorts of times. It is frequent, it is constant. They're reliving it sometimes, even when it's not happening to them. And so you can see why substance abuse becomes a massive coping skill for folks from an early age sometimes, at least when you get on the street. It dulls the emotional sort of lability up and down. Sometimes it gives you the energy you need to survive. Sometimes it gives you the sleep you want. Sometimes it's just getting away from things, the loneliness, the discomfort, all those pieces. The other piece is when you get into substance use, it's compulsive. And I say it's not impulsive in that some folks you get triggered and you use. For a lot of folks, it is constant. It's a compulsion. It drives you when you get deep enough into that. And it's difficult to break that cycle because you can see the circular nature of this. So when we talk about why there's folks out there on the streets who are not saying yes to services or not trusting the service providers going out, It has less to say sometimes about who the service provider is or the service is being offered, and more to say about the nature of their experience right now. As we get more resources and as we're more consistent in offering the right resources to the right folks, it's a science and an art, that should improve. But we can't really expect people to just jump on board with a service that's actually not reasonable at this time, and then blame them as well at times for not accepting help. I think that doesn't get us down the right path. And so there are people out there who we know are preying on folks who are out there for the business side of things and not necessarily because they have no place to sleep. We know there are folks that are pretty deep in their addiction. It's going to take some pretty significant intervention to stop that. But I think that's the minority of people we're seeing. Most of the people we're seeing fall somewhere in this sort of circular motion. And some days they're pretty good and some days they're really bad. And some days they end up in jail and some days they don't. Some days they go to the center, sometimes they don't go into the center. Some days they're open to talking to an outreach worker, some days they're not. And so we have to understand that a little bit in our service delivery piece, just to help you and other folks that we're talking to on the state and local level understand. It's going to take more time, it's going to take more consistency, and it's going to take a system that continues to offer things in a really kind of client-centered way to understand where they're at and tailor as much as we can to the needs, because I think most folks will come in. We've seen that in the last few years when we've offered a service in the wintertime that seems appropriate to what their needs are. They've come in voluntarily in large numbers. So I still believe that. I believe our enforcement piece is important for that portion of the population who is not necessarily homeless or needing the still services. But I don't want to throw all of the folks we're seeing out there in the same boat with them. So if that's helpful, great. If there's other things I can follow up on in small group meetings or other times to maybe help put some face to what we're seeing out there, just please let me know.
Andrew, thank you so much. I really appreciate that slide and that information. I think I can speak for the majority of us when in saying that and you know from being a council member as well, that we get that comment a lot. And it's sort of this stigma on what we're trying to do and on the populations that we're trying to help. And I think that slide and kind of putting that into perspective is helpful and gives me a new tool when answering that question from constituents or residents that are, maybe sort of placing blame in some ways where it doesn't need to necessarily be placed. So I appreciate that a lot, and look forward to more information there. Council members, any other questions?
Madam Chair, I just want to say that I agree with you, and I want to thank Andrew as well for that. That was very insightful and helpful to me. Thank you.
Great. I don't know if there is any other update from the mayor's office. Lisa is there. So do you have something, Lisa?
I don't have anything. I just wanted to say the mayor had to step away for a quick moment. So if there are any questions that I could get to her, I'd be happy to do that. Otherwise, thank you for the time.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Since we still don't have Anna here, let's move to agenda item number 3, which is an update on our racial equity and policing. And that will be from Allison, if Allison is available. Sorry, we're a bit early, but I'm skipping around. So thank you for being available, Allison.
Oh, I hang on all of your words every meeting. So just some quick updates on the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. Actually, before I get to that, Coletta Lynch asked me to mention that the city's ADA coordinator position is open. The previous person who filled that role is no longer with the city. So this is being announced on HR, and if obviously she's interested in getting that word out as broadly as possible. The second thing is that the REP Commission did indeed meet on September 29th, beginning their second year of operation. Most of last year's commissioners did return to the commission. A few of them had to step aside for various personal reasons. The group elected as their chair for this year, Commissioner Nicole Salazar Hall, and as vice chair, Commissioner Tanya Hopkins. So those two will be functioning in those roles this year. And the commission also approved a full set of policies similar to what other commissions and boards have in the city to guide the commission's ongoing work. So that was also done. They also received from Fire Department Chief Carl Lieb a briefing on the Community Health Access Team proposal. That's the chat proposal that some of you may have heard about. And finally, they agreed to a new schedule for meetings. It's going to be monthly at 5 p.m. on the last Wednesday of every month. So the next meeting will be on October 27th. That's all I have for today.
Thank you so much, Allison. And I see at least Anna's tile. So we will jump back to our first agenda item. And I'm going to be really honest that I'm going to try to get through this without crying. But not sure I'll be able to do that. So this item of business is taking place as a result of Council Member James Rogers' resignation from his District 1 seat that was effective yesterday. There are 3 months left in this term, and a replacement for his seat will be chosen by council members in November after an open and public process. If interested in this process, please contact the Recorder's Office at 801-535-7671 or visit our website at slccouncil.com. So for those of you listening, clearly we know that there will be an election for that seat on November 2nd, but that position is not sworn into office until the beginning of January. Therefore, there will be the remaining time of James's seat that would need to be filled. So from that month and a half or so. And under our ordinances and state laws, we have 30 days from his effective date of resignation to fill that seat. As people are very well aware, we've done this now. This will be our 4th time. So there is a process in place. If anyone is interested in applying, as I said, please contact the Recorder's Office at 535-7671 or visit our website at slccouncil.com. In the meantime, Councilmember Rogers. Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, Jen.
I'm sorry. I just noticed that Councilmember Valdemoros's tile dropped off. I'm not sure if maybe she's in the elevator or something, but anyway, I just wanted to let you know.
Okay, I will wait and gather my tears. Can somebody text Anna?
Yep,
Yes, I texted her. Okay, I see we have Anna back on her phone.
I am here.
Thank you, Anna. So in the meantime, Councilmember Rogers was serving as vice chair of the council for 2021. Therefore, the council will need to elect a new vice chair to serve through the rest of the year. Council members, anyone who is interested in serving, you will have an opportunity to let the council know that. After we know which council members are interested, then we will take a straw poll vote in the chat. So council members will message the host on your chat panel. Taylor on our staff will receive those messages and update our tracking sheet. And then Cindy Liu from the Recorder's Office will then read the final tally once all council members have voted. So I open up the floor to anyone who is interested in this position. don't all jump at once. I'm not that bad to work with.
Well,
Is this a question of self-nominating or is this people making nominations?
Self-nominating. That's how we're doing it this time. Sorry, there's a big fine.
Okay. Well, everybody, I would be happy to self-nominate myself. I know that this has been a lot of turnover that we've had recently on the council, and I would just like to offer my ability and having been the immediate past chair of the council to be able to step in and help us get us over the finish line for the last 3 months of this year. And hopefully there won't be too much of a learning curve. I've tried to stay up on everything and just want to be there just to see us through the rest of our ambitious goals for the year, and of course to support our chair who has I just want to be as much help as I can. Thank you.
Anyone else, council members?
I was going to nominate Chris, so I won't say anything at this point.
I'll second the nomination if that's required.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn to the powers that be. Do you still, we have one person nominated. Do we still need to put in the chat the votes just in case, and then have Cindy Lou read them off?
Don't, because your actual vote will be during the council meeting. And so right now, what you've told us is that what you'll be doing at your council meeting later is confirming the selection of, or the nomination, so to speak, of Chris Wharton as the vice chair. So that's it.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Cindy Lou. And thank you, Chris, for stepping up, and for all of the council members for supporting James in his decision. That is an admirable decision. And although he's going to be sorely, sorely missed, I really appreciate your support and your ability to adapt to these last couple of years that seem that there's always something that new we have to adapt to. So thank you all. With that, we are on agenda item number 4. We are about a half an hour early. Do we know if we have the necessary people online ready to go if we go now?
So now with which item?
It is the University Ivory House zoning map amendment. I see Brian and I see Kelsey. So I think that we would be able to go forward. Thank you for being available a little bit early.
At 1780 East South Campus Drive from its current institutional zoning to residential mixed use to accommodate a planned student housing development. Parcel was subdivided from a larger parcel owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who still owns the property. If the rezone is approved, the applicant and the church will enter into a long-term lease for the property. Planning Commission approved a planned development and design review conditioned on City Council approval of the zoning map amendment. Commission forwarded a unanimous positive recommendation to the council. The applicant is with us in the meeting and would appreciate an opportunity to address the council. I will turn it.
Thank you, Brian, for that overview. Could somebody please bring up my slide deck? Wonderful. And Brian actually gave a really in-depth overview and covered mostly what I was going to talk about. So I'll actually jump to the differences between the institutional zoning district and the residential mixed-use zoning district. So if you could go down to the third slide, that's perfect. These two districts differ in regard to the permitted development scale. Comparing the three key development standards, which are listed in the table on the screen, the by right building height and setbacks in the RMU does allow for a larger scale building than in the I, which is the institutional zoning district. Additionally, the RMU permits substantially smaller setbacks, as well as just larger massing in general. However, with the current development proposal that was approved by Planning Commission, the applicant requested to exceed the front yard setbacks. And actually, the development is a similar scaled and sited to a development that would be located in the institutional zoning district. The primary difference in the proposed development with the institutional zoning district and the requested RMU zone is the requested use. The multifamily residential is not a permitted land use in the institutional zoning district. Next slide, please. And as Brian mentioned, the Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation for the requested zoning map amendment and also approved the requested plan development and design review on July 28th, 2021. I can answer any questions at this time. You have any?
Council members, any questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes, of course.
I think I know the answer to this, Kelsey, but can you just clarify why, in this case, the city has jurisdiction over the uses in the institutional zoning district when on most of the University of Utah campus we do not?
Yeah, you're correct, Councilmember Mono. In this case, the Church of Latter-day Saints owns the property and the state does not own the property. So we do have jurisdiction over development on this parcel.
Sorry, couldn't unmute. Any other questions, council members?
I do have one, Madam Chair. Kelsey, you said that they are trying to exceed the front yard setback, but there's no front yard setback requirement. So how does that work?
Yes, I misspoke. So exceed the maximum front yard setback. So they went through the plan development process to exceed that front yard setback so that they could preserve the existing vegetation, those old growth trees along Mario Capecchi and South Campus Drive.
Okay, so basically they're trying to do the reverse of what
Yeah.
the zone says, basically, but to preserve the open space in the front and the vegetation.
That's
okay.
correct.
Oh, that's cool. Thanks.
Council members, any other questions? And I know that go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no question, but Kelsey, thanks for the presentation and also talking to Ivory. I think it's a good program for the foundation and the scholarships and a good use of that land and the trees I, as I always stress, if we can reduce the parking lots, it'd be great, and make it more natural landscape would be awesome. Also awesome with the water problems we have in the state. So I always press for that, but I do like the idea that we have more student housing right next to campus, and they can use their bikes and they can use their 2 feet to get to class by a car or a scooter if you're Darren. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And Brian mentioned that the applicant was on, and so if we want to give, I don't know who's here from as representing the applicant, but I'm happy to give 5 minutes to whoever is here and wants to speak to this petition.
Madam Chair, I know they were planning to be here, but I wonder if, since we're ahead of schedule, they may not have logged in yet.
If Brian, if you don't mind keeping your eye out for them, I'm happy to kind of jump back and give them space. I know we have jumped or gone a little bit quicker, and certainly don't want to deprive them of the opportunity to address the council, since of course they're invited to do such. So if you see them, will you just flag me somehow and we can jump back to this agenda item?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I'll reach out to them now and ask if they're available. And then when there's a break between items, let you know that they're here.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. Chris, did you have something?
Who is the applicant?
It's Ashley Hadfield and Scott from CH2 Construction, I believe.
Okay. So why isn't the university the applicant?
It's the Christine and Clark Ivory Foundation
Well,
of the applicant.
University doesn't own.
Yeah, they don't own it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Again, knowing that we are a bit ahead of schedule, I am going to ask if our group from Livable Streets is available, and
They
that
are.
would be Allison and John and Laura. Do you mind jumping in and giving us your presentation on the Livable Streets program? And I'll turn the time over to Allison first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Fortunately, John and Laura and possibly Scott Vaudelas has now, I hope I didn't ruin your last name, sorry. I hope Scott is also able to join us, but John and Laura were on the call, so they were able to jump in early. I'm going to give just a little bit of information, sort of context on the Livable Streets program for those of you who weren't around to see its initiation, let alone its previous incarnation, and then I'll turn the time over to the Transportation Division experts. So in terms of context, as many of you know, this is an ongoing constituent interest, and there was a previous neighborhood traffic calming program, which ended in 2005. Because of the constant public interest, the council allocated $100,000 in 2019, specifically to support an update to this program. There was also a council legislative intent that year that the administration develop recommendations for reestablishing the program and identify any additional resources needed. The Transportation Division provided a briefing to the council on their proposal to develop a livable street in early 2020, and the council supported this. So this is what you're looking at today is the culmination of all this previous work. It's referred to in the title as the Livable Streets Recommendations. I sort of varied calling it Livable Streets Program Proposal or something along those lines, just to try to keep it clear that the recommendations are for the program rather than something else. So the report outlines how to structure and implement a new Livable Streets program, and it's designed to systematically identify priority neighborhoods and improve on this previous program, which I imagine they'll mention why that was ultimately untenable as it was structured. I want to mention that this would be a big new program. The report recommends dedicated management and resources, potentially a new budget line item just for Livable Streets. The estimated cost as it's designed is $700,000 to $1 million per year, and that would include at least three new FTEs for community outreach and implementation. They would also need support and coordination with the engineering division, which, as you know, was moved to the Public Services Department as a result of the last budget. They'd also need help with Public Utilities Department and the Fire Department. In addition, they would need to work with UTA and a number of other outside agencies, and they may have different goals than this program does. For example, UTA may be more interested in getting its buses moving quickly down certain parts of the city rather than slowing down traffic, which is essentially the aim of the Livable Streets program. So today the council is asked to review the program recommendations and provide direction to the administration. The Transportation Division was actually great in providing a set of policy questions that they would like for guidance from the council, and those are listed at the end in the policy questions section of the staff report. And then council staff also added policy questions in that final section. So I believe we can move on to the Transportation Division's presentation unless anyone has questions before then.
Council members, any questions at this time? Okay, I will turn it over to John.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an exciting day. I know it's been feels like a long time coming to finally present some recommendations for a program. And Laura Handworker on our staff managed this effort. And so I'm going to turn over to her to jump into the presentation that she's prepared.
Thanks, John. I will try to keep my presentation fairly short so we can just move on into the discussion and some of those policy questions that are in our presentation and Allison's report as well. And thank you for pulling all of that together, Allison. We can go ahead and move on to the first or next slide. So just a quick definition or how we look at the phrase livable streets. It's to make all of our neighborhood streets in the city safe and functional for all types of road users, you know, cyclists, pedestrians, those in vehicles. And so the biggest goal of the program is to slow traffic in residential areas through physical design rather than just, you know, signage or paint or things like that. In order to improve safety for motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists, in order to combat speeding and other unsafe behaviors of drivers in neighborhoods, and so that we can encourage safer and more responsible driving in Salt Lake City. And then beyond just traffic calming, we're calling it livable streets because we want it to be a suite of solutions that contribute to a neighborhood's increased quality of life, so through both the built and natural elements of the environment, community safety, accessibility, connectivity to goods and services, and then also looking at it in terms of equitably distributing all of those factors throughout the city. You can move to the next, please. So the goals of the Livable Streets program, we really want to develop a high level of collaboration and trust between city staff and residents with a thorough engagement and outreach process during the implementation of the program. And in doing so, we want to provide a forum for communities to discuss concerns and solutions. So we know that, you know, traffic calming or speeding cars are one of the top complaints that the Transportation Division gets in any given year, and those numbers just seem to go up, the number of calls that we get about this issue. And so it's something that a lot of residents are concerned about, and we want to provide this forum for them to express those concerns and discuss solutions in partnership with the city. And we also want to create a fair, transparent, and data-driven process for prioritizing funding, but also manage expectations regarding the number of projects that can be implemented each year. Again, it's an issue for the neighborhoods throughout the city, and many people want to see improvements on their streets immediately. Of course, it's understandable, and so we want to be really upfront that it is a longer term process, or just that it's going to take a really long time to work throughout all of those problem areas. And so we want the process for which we do so to be really, really transparent and fair and equitable. Next slide, please. So one way that we are attempting to reach that goal of equitable distribution is by dividing the city up into zones to implement these solutions rather than implementing on a street-by-street basis. One of the pitfalls or the shortcomings of the previous iteration of the program, and one of the reasons that it ended up being discontinued, was it went on a street-by-street implementation basis, and you can imagine that sort of leads to a pitting neighbors against neighbors sort of outlook, or the idea that you know, since we're a grid system in most places in the city, if my neighbors one street over get traffic calming on their street, are all the cars just going to come speeding down my street instead? And so to avoid that, we divided the city up into these zones where, as we move down the list of implementation, we would do an entire zone of traffic calming at once. And the reasoning behind that was to ensure that if drivers did want to try to avoid, go out of their way to avoid the traffic calming elements on any given street, that they would just have to keep going until they hit an arterial. But ideally, we're not trying to push traffic around. We're trying to make each street that we implement on more livable. So it really is, this zonal approach is really important to reaching those goals of ensuring lowering speeds and then not just pushing traffic from one neighborhood street to another. And so the streets that are included in the program, obviously city-owned streets, they would need to have a posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour or less and have 3 lanes or fewer. The idea behind that is that and we can talk about this in terms of the traffic calming toolkit that I'll mention later on in the report in the presentation. The typical residential traffic calming solutions aren't going to be appropriate for streets that are larger than 3 lanes. And we also only looked at streets that had a residential land use component. It doesn't mean that they would need to be zoned residential. We can have some of mixed use, or areas downtown where we have a lot of, our multifamily apartment buildings. We're not excluding those by any means. It was more just excluding purely industrial areas, or areas that are only sort of those heavier business nodes. And then finally, we only included streets that are not part of a funded, scheduled, or upcoming transportation project. And that's just because the streets are already scheduled to have construction or reconstruction done on them, that the goals of the Livable Streets program, or really the Complete Streets Ordinance, those are going to be taken into account during that project process. And so we would rather retain the funds that might get used for the Livable Streets program, keep those for streets that aren't already receiving improvements. Next slide, please. Okay, so this might get a little bit complicated, so I'm happy to pause after this slide if there are any questions. But we went through the list of zones where there ended up being 113 of them. And again, in order to try to prioritize the areas that are most in need of traffic calming, we created a prioritized list through this really data-driven process that included crashes with recorded injuries, and we weighted fatality crashes higher than non-fatality crashes. Also looked at vehicle speeds, recorded speeds, and sort of the difference between the speed limit and then the average speed if vehicles are traveling over that speed limit. The density of community assets like parks, schools, trails, things like that, and within a certain distance of each zone. We looked at the number of households within each zone, so basically weighting areas of high density, more residents higher, and also included households in each zone without vehicles, we looked at the presence of minority households, and I think we also weighted bike and pedestrian crashes on a as a separate data point than just vehicle crashes as well. We can go to the next slide. So all that being said, moving forward with the implementation of the program, we would seek to identify potential solutions for each zone in conjunction with any applicable Salt Lake City transportation plans, our transit master plan, or pedestrian bicycle master plan, any transportation standards and best practices. And Allison mentioned that, we would really need to coordinate with our engineering, public utilities, and emergency services providers as well moving forward. Next slide, please. So the goal of the program is to have a really robust and well-rounded public engagement process. We know that this is something that a lot of residents are really interested in, really engaged in, and a lot of residents have, really great ideas for their own neighborhood streets. And so we want to ensure that we can loop them in from the beginning to the end of the process. And we are also seeking to have a variety of virtual and non-virtual engagement methods in order to capture as many folks as possible. So ideally, the public engagement process moving forward through implementation would involve updating the program website and pushing that out through the cities and transportation divisions, virtual channels, notifying the affected zones and any community councils, and there might be a little bit of overlap. The zones aren't, perfectly lined up with community councils or city council boundaries, even though we tried. So notifying all of them via a postcard or flyers, maybe lawn signs, as well as virtual outreach. And then we would host a zone meeting. So any residents actually within the boundaries of those zones. And then again, if there's, desire from the community council to have representation as well, we could go to those meetings to discuss solutions and solicit input from residents, and really track all of our engagement along this time to see how well we're doing with capturing a variety of voices during this process, and be able to show directly how we're using that resident input to inform the final solutions that will be selected. All right, next slide, please. We did have a survey that was out earlier this summer, I think in June and July. And, as with most digital-only surveys, I do want to say that participation in the survey was self-selecting, and I don't intend for these results to imply consensus from all city residents on any of these issues, but just rather to give a little bit of insight into how some of our residents are thinking. Getting at the broad picture of livability, again, beyond just traffic calming, we asked what other priorities for the program would be. And, reducing vehicle speeds clearly came in first. Folks were also really interested in adding green space or trees. And then there was also a lot of interest in adding or enhancing bike facilities, crosswalks, and connecting neighborhood destinations together. And street lighting was also referenced pretty frequently in the open-ended comment sections. So it just sort of gives an idea of the different elements that folks are thinking about when they think about how their neighborhoods could be more livable, feel safer when they're traveling on the streets. And then this question on the right, the pie chart, and this is something that we'll discuss in the policy questions later on. But just trying to get at that, we have a finite budget. Do we want to see a few really nice improvements in fewer areas, or do we want to see, maybe lower cost or less durable installations spread across a wider geographic area. So it wasn't exactly evenly split, but there wasn't a huge divide between the answers on those questions of that survey. Next slide, please. All right, so moving on into the discussion and hopefully being able to listen to me talk less. We had a few different questions that I'll run through really quickly, and then we can also just answer any other questions that may have come up during the presentation. But real quick, we wanted to ask if capital funding for implementation of the program should go through the CIP process, or would it need to have an independent budget line item? We were wondering if could funding for new livable street staff come from the Funding Our Future revenue source? And then should the program's implementation proceed through the prioritized list that I mentioned at a citywide level, or should it proceed through the prioritized zones, but going council district by council district? And then is there a desire to provide staff and resources to respond to complaints with quick build projects in addition to implementing the prioritized zones? So basically just having another way to respond to resident complaints in real time, basically. So that is it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer any clarifying questions about anything that came up during the presentation or anything else.
Thank you so much for that presentation. And before I get to questions, council members, the policy questions that transportation provided in that last slide are on page 5 of the staff report, just so that we don't have to have that slide up so I can see everybody's tile if you want to refer to that as we have these discussions. And then the staff suggested policy questions are also on page 5. And there's some good questions here, so I imagine we'll be getting to the majority of them-ish. Dennis, did you have something?
I did, thank you. Real quick, Laura, what about neighborhood streets that have a posted speed limit over 30 miles an hour? Ninth West, for example, has 35 posted, but it has received a lot of complaints lately.
It's a good question. We put that limitation in there just due to the effectiveness of the tools suggested in the toolkit, which are found in the full Livable Streets report. So I think that any streets that, again, are either wider than that 3 lanes or are higher than 30-mile-per-hour speed limit would need to be approached in I don't want to say more holistic, because we would like Livable Streets to be a holistic program, but maybe a little higher level of reconstruction in order to slow vehicle speeds effectively.
All righty, thank you. Do have limited resources.
My question is from the Funding Our Future question number 3 in the packet. Can we use, or sorry, question 2 in the packet, can we use Funding Our Future dollars for this? And where would it be, where are we currently using them where we could use them for this?
So overall, I don't know if, John, you want to respond to that question? I assume you know the transportation side of it. In general, Councilmember Wharton, the Funding Our Future dollars are limited for spending in a number of categories, which you're probably familiar with. Public safety, housing, transportation. I think it's streets and transportation, if I remember correctly. So it would be competing in essence for dollars with those, but perhaps the transportation folks want to elaborate on this.
Sure. And, obviously anything I say is caveated with the fact that that's completely a council decision. But our reasoning of even bringing up the question was that this is it seems like it's kind of in a place that is an overlap of street infrastructure and public safety. Some people refer to speed bumps as a sleeping police officer, because it provides 24/7 speed reduction. And so that was our reasoning of even bringing up the question, but obviously that's a policy decision that respect.
Yeah, I was just going to pop on to clarify that the council is entirely in control of what Funding Our Future is spent on, and I think that the council has tried to stay true to what was sort of originally promised to the public, and in terms of those general categories that Allison mentioned. But like, for example, over the last couple of years, the definition of public safety, the council has evolved that definition of public safety as fire and EMS and dispatch is clearly an element of public safety that that Funding Our Future now goes to. And so I think that John's point that there's a public safety element to this, I think as long as the council or city communicates that to the public, I think that was the commitment, was just to be transparent about how those dollars are spent and to track how those dollars are spent. I think the bigger challenge will be the trade-offs within that Funding Our Future category, right? All of those items are important, and it's not an unlimited resource either. So I think that's just the balancing act.
Karen?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I guess, why do we even, I agree that this is a public safety thing. This is clearly making our streets safer. Children and pets will be safer on our streets. But why do we even need to do that? Because it seems like it would also fit into the streets category pretty comfortably. Or when the council, before I was on the council, adopted that streets category, was it narrowly tailored?
It was fairly narrowly tailored in terms of it was intended to address the perception or the experience that the infrastructure was not well maintained, right? Like potholes and stuff like that. So that was kind of narrow. I think that the semantics of does it fit in a category or not is sort of like the least important question, because really the council could spend that money on anything you wanted. The most important question is, are there enough Funding Our Future dollars to address all of the things, right? Like, would you spend less on affordable housing in order to accommodate this? Would you spend less on transportation in order to accommodate this? So it's a finite pie, and while it does grow a little bit every year, it doesn't, grow infinitely every year. So to the extent that you add a ton of things into the umbrella of Funding Our Future, it just increases the sort of competition among those items within Funding Our Future.
Cindy popped on. Is there something you'd like to say, Cindy?
A question about timing. Based on what Jennifer was saying about Funding Our Future, you can say exactly the same thing about CIP. And we have tried to push any new funding for things that qualify as capital through the CIP process, so that we can have everything in context in one place, so that we can have the impact fee money, the Class C road fund money, the Funding Our Future money, and the CIP money all considered in one context. So I would suggest that you keep that in mind as you evaluate this program. But I also wanted to ask the administration if they would anticipate that this would go through the regular budget process, so that the mayor can weigh it against the other city needs. Or are they looking for a situation where they get an answer now and it's baked into the mayor's budget and and possibly the council's budget? I'm just not quite familiar with whether this would be held. This is a briefing about your progress, and the actual decision would be conducted as part of the budget, so that it can be considered in all the context, or if there's another thing going on.
I can jump in, if that's okay. Just share some thoughts on that. Yeah, I think we're pretty open, and to your point, Cindy, that I think that there's seems to be extra transparency when these sorts of initiatives get considered as part of the regular budget cycle, right? As part of whether it's the main budget or the CIP budget. And so, if this is something that there isn't formal action until the FY23 budget, that's maybe the cleanest way to do it. But if council said, hey, we want to find money and we don't want to wait that long, we're we're willing to act as fast as you are. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
Okay, yeah, that is helpful. I just, with the bit of uncertainty that was that we all together worked on in this adoption of this year's budget, council members, with the addition of the police salary changes and several employees and things like that, it would be a little unusual to add 3 more employees mid-year and create a large program. You could do it, and we know that it is a priority of yours. It would just be difficult if later in the budget deliberations you looked back and said, oh, we wish we had that $1 million or that $500,000. So it's a pretty big decision to make mid-year, but it can be done.
Darren?
Yeah, a couple questions. Moving on from where the money will come from. For my part, I think that it does fit into funding our future, but I don't really care where it comes from. I know this is like a constant request of my constituents, and I think everyone's. So no matter where it comes from, we need to find it. That's the way I see this. But question on the $700 to $1 million a year. How many of those 113 zones does that get us through in that amount of time? Because 113 is a lot of zones.
Yeah, and that's a hard question to answer directly. I think probably the best thing we have for context is the constituent CIP requests that have come through, and those we are already kind of nudging constituents in that direction with their requests. And the cost estimates for those have ranged from, I think, the 250 to 600,000 range per zone.
So that would be 1 zone, 1 to 2 zones per year if we're counting all this, also staff.
Yeah.
We need to get through this faster than in 60 years.
Well, yeah, that's a fair concern. I just didn't want to come in here saying, hey, 10 million a year, let's get rolling. From where I sit, our biggest constraint right now is keeping up with the constituent requests that have been funded over the last couple of years. It's the staff time that, and many of you have seen as we've been engaging with many of your constituents. To do it right takes a tremendous amount of engagement and listening and hand-holding and adjusting, dealing with people changing their minds or new residents coming in and saying, wait, I missed the first half of this conversation, but now I want to really engage. And you have to, it's a lot of time, and that means staff. And so I would say, the most urgent thing for us would just be having people to even catch up with our backlog. And then I think the capital from there expanding, adding more capital money into the mix would be easier.
So, I mean, this is a big thing, right? I mean, to get through 113 zones is a lot. I would like to discuss with the council that policy question you raise of should we have a person or a program that does fast, cheap, immediate solutions. That's something I've been asking my constituents a lot, and I realize that that may mean that the things on the street are a little bit more ugly or a little less convenient or somewhat temporary. But I would, from what I hear, most of the people I've talked to and asked this exact question are interested in just creating the safety, even if that sacrifices in the short term or even in the mid to long term, the beauty of the street to a degree. Like, and we're talking about like, you know, the big metal troughs or their concrete planters that get sat in the middle of the road, or those flexible delineators, those like reflector sticks that get glued to the ground. I mean, they're cheap and fast and they're not the most attractive, but they do seem to work. And most of the people that I've talked to said, I just want my kids to be safe. So I would be interested in that quick, fast solution as a short-term measure if doing it right is going to take us 60 years. We need something faster than that. That's how I feel, at least.
Thank you, Darren. Other council members? Dan?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Laura, for the presentation. I really appreciate this program and the street calming. You know, the two things I hear about most are, you know, the street conditions and the safety and the street calming. And I think most of my district put in CEIPs for street calming. So I kind of, I'll echo what Darren was saying. The faster, cheaper model sometimes does have a lot of turmoil in some of in the neighborhoods because people don't all agree to the faster and the cheaper. But I think if we can do that maybe in concert with more of the long-term one, but you're right, if it's going to take us for a long time to do 113 zones, then maybe in parallel with that we do the faster and the cheaper ones at the same time. I have, if we're finished with that discussion, I have one more question, but I can hold off on my next question.
Go ahead, Dan.
The next thing, I really like the way you're grading the zones into priorities. My one question is, and it's perfectly normal to do that, but I also want to look at and this maybe go to the faster and cheaper, is the preventable zones. You know, an intersection hasn't had a fatality, hasn't had a crash, hasn't had a kid get hit by a car, but it's had a lot of near misses. And I know those are probably not tracked very well, but how do we, I don't know, quantify that side of the problem? Because I want to prevent the next fatality with a calming project, and not wait for the fatality to have the project. And so in the future, I think we need to just think about how we prioritize the preventative side of the street calming, not just the you got to prioritize that.
I think I can speak to that a little bit, Councilmember Dugan, if I may. Sorry, my internet's being a little bad. You hit the nail on the head that it's incredibly difficult to quantify near misses. I don't know how we would do specifically that. I think that it is something that we have tried to get at through some of the other metrics in the prioritization process. One that I think gets at it maybe the most is the proximity to community resources. Just thinking of those in terms of, you know, foot and bicycle and vehicle traffic generators. That's where you're going to have the most conflicts. Generally speaking, obviously there are neighborhood streets where you got kids playing in the street, and that's another point of conflict, but maybe it's not right near a park or a grocery store. But I think that is one way that we can try and quantify the maybes, just any place where you have a lot of folks crossing the street, you're going to have a higher potential for those sorts of crashes, even if they haven't actually happened yet. So I think that that's probably the biggest, or the one metric that would speak to that the most. And then we also did prioritize a little bit heavier just population density. So just thinking about how many pedestrians have the potential to be on the streets or crossing the streets. So I'm sure that, as with most things, there's other ways to approach it and additional ways to look at it, but that's how we looked at it through the bounds of this program, at least.
Thank you.
Blake, I was informed that you had your hand up for some time and then you popped off. So it's I'll let you talk.
Thanks, no problem. I would just echo Laura's response there to Councilmember Dugan. Another great asset is just the community members, as far as the eyes and ears on the street that send complaints to us as this really unofficial data source, as it relates to the near miss, maybe unrecorded type of events. And I also just wanted to echo John in response to Cindy Gus Jensen's really thoughtful question about the timing. And I know that we've been eager to wrap this study up, have some data-driven recommendations to present to the council. And just in my role, this is the number one issue that the transportation team brings to me as it relates to community concerns, and then also the number one requester meetings that we have with council members. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that due to that demand and sense of urgency that we have is why we came forward now with sort of a suite of options and look for your direction and are amenable to whatever process, of course, that you want to run, but also didn't want to sit on our hands knowing the timeliness. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Blake. Chris, did you have your hand up? I apologize if I didn't see it.
That's okay. So I have several questions. So first of all, a lot of people think that the issue is about enforcement of just the existing speed limits or whatever. And we made, I know that our police officers are already trained, and that this is not really something you can do when you're trying to go call to call to call to answer our backlog. But theoretically, like, are you aware, or is transportation aware, like, do enforcement efforts, or like having, like a sting and issuing a bunch of tickets, are those effective at all? And is this something that we could use? If they are, like, we passed, we put $2 million aside for a pilot program for non-law enforcement, and could we access that to help with part of this, or is this have to be physical changes to the street?
I'm happy to take a first swing at the, or John.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great question, and thank you for that, Councilmember Wharton. I think that I would say, one, I can't speak to the effectiveness of, word of mouth. There's a week-long, a month-long sting, and we issue a bunch of tickets. I can't speak to the effectiveness of that, honestly. But what I would say is that no matter how hard we hit the enforcement piece, it's not going to capture everyone. And I think even going back to what Councilmember Dugan was asking, we want to prevent these issues before they turn into crashes or fatalities. And enforcement is largely reactionary to folks causing problems. And we would love to be able to create these physical implementations to prevent the behavioral problems that speeding and irresponsible drivers can bring to the streets. So I would say that that's the benefit of doing physical implementation over relying on enforcement. But I'll let John speak up with what he was about to say as well.
I'll just add that studies that I've seen have shown that a police presence is highly effective at getting people to comply with the posted speed limit, but that basically the minute the police car is gone, people go back to speeding. So that's the challenge with enforcement.
Okay, and that was kind of what I suspected would be the answer. And then in the presentation, it said, talked about working with neighbors and developing strategies. And I think that certainly is appreciated, and a lot of neighbors will want to be to participate in that. But I also think that a lot of people feel like we already know the problem. That this presentation you've given basically gives us the data that we need. Why can't we just pay to implement it? And why doesn't the implementation kind of save us money at some point? Because once we've implemented so many changes, that it would ideally become less of a burden on staff time, because in theory, these changes are going to work, right? Or they're going to help. So I worry about that. And I don't know if that's not a question. I don't know if you want to speak to that. But I'll also say that this is like the #1 issue that I hear from constituents about. And I think that there is a high expectation and the mind of residents that I talk to, that this is one of the city's main jobs, to make sure that people aren't speeding and make sure streets are safe and try to prevent, kids and pets from getting hit by cars. And so I think in the public's mind, in terms of their view, like this would be one of the most important things that we could fund. So I want to try to fund it, and I want to find a way. I just want to find the best way to do that, and get the most sort of bang for our buck. And yeah, so if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Can I ask for a quick clarification, Councilmember Wharton, just so I don't go off on a tangent that you weren't actually asking about? Are you saying that you're concerned about staff time, just in terms of the level of involvement required for each zone, and as we go down the line and hopefully prove that it's effective, that we would be able to reduce staff times within each zone?
I guess not so much per zone, but I know that the level of staff time that your division has to set aside to respond to constituents, to explain the situation, to address certain traffic issues, I know that takes up a lot of your bandwidth. And I'm wondering if we put money towards a solution that calms traffic, is that, like, in theory, that's going to give you guys more bandwidth to deal with all the other transportation issues that we ask you to deal with that don't involve talking to the public about traffic calming. So I guess I'm trying to understand, like, where, if we spend a little bit of money here, is that going to give us more of a result over here versus, just what's the smartest way for us to spend? And if I know that, then I feel like I can understand. It's easier for me to make decisions about where I should take money from another priority.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Yeah, I mean, so for example, in your district, Councilmember Wharton, we have Kyle Cook, who is an engineer that we hired. We hired, we staffed up as part of, to meet the needs of the Funding Our Future program, with the new bus service and rebuilding roads, streets as complete streets. And, Kyle he's a project manager on the 600 North project, the Second South project, and then probably half a dozen other smaller projects, which already is kind of more than you would typically want to ask a project manager. But then he also put in a tremendous amount of effort developing, some preliminary plans with the West Capitol Hill neighborhood, and just because he's that good, I guess, found the time to do it.
He's very good. Very good.
But there were a few projects that got slowed down. Some of the medium-sized projects, the really big, the bond projects, those are still on track. But there were a couple of maybe small to medium-sized projects that maybe took a little bit of a hit because of the amount of engagement he had to put in, basically with traffic calming. And so I don't know if this is exactly what you were asking, but having staff that could be dedicated to traffic calming issues would absolutely free up existing staff to focus more on the collector and arterial and neighborhood byway projects and the transit Funding Our Future implementation. Because right now we're diverting staff time away from those initiatives for traffic calming. I'm not sure if that was your question, but that
Well, it was more like, maybe it was more like if we did an infusion of money now, does that necessary to address some of these problems and clear up staff time? Is there any? Those are just going to continue to be ongoing costs, right? We're not going to be able to do any of this traffic calming with sort of a one-time or a short-time funding, and then hope that that frees up enough staff resources that we can complete the other backlog of work that we can have to deal with the bigger projects, right? Like this is just going to be an ongoing cost no matter what.
That's how I see it, is regardless of how we approach it now, 50, 70 years from now, I think this will still be an issue that we'll still be wanting to improve upon, kind of like staying healthy and fit. I think I see it as just part of having healthy streets that it takes. I think it'll just be an ongoing effort.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
To Chris's point, or maybe something that I was just thinking of while you were talking, is there, I know that I personally have asked a lot of your staff in responding to my constituents' complaints, and thank you so much for being willing to do that. I imagine other council members are doing the same thing, and I can only imagine how much time that takes away from like actually planning projects, even that may already be funded. So is there a way that this program could be structured so that we can reduce that? And I guess it seems like if there's a formal process that it happens, and maybe it's similar to CIP, but it's like a separate process that happens. I don't know exactly how to do it, but can we funnel that constituent energy and time into this like thing that gets so that it takes time off of your staff shoulders? So maybe we don't necessarily have to hire 3 more people. We're just like freeing up time of your current staff by setting in policy a process that where constituents can, very clearly record what's happening and give the feedback, ask for the questions. Maybe there's a way that they can survey or petition their neighbors, but it's like a process that the city's set up that basically, because I've been to several of these, even with you personally, John, and it's like we're telling all the constituents the same things, and we're talking about the same processes, and we're talking about the same options that do or do not exist with every single meeting. Is there a way that we could formalize that and do like more of an online info page and like a yearly application process so that we're only meeting with the ones that have gone through the process and then get funded. Of course, we're still going to have upset constituents, or we're still going to have people that want things faster than we can fund, but perhaps that will cut down on some of the meetings that I know that I have asked your staff to do, if there is that formalized process, and maybe it needs to be separate from CIP just for that purpose of giving constituents a separate venue to talk about this.
Yeah, I think
maybe the actual question for you, John, is do you have a way to quantify how much of your staff time is going to those types of meetings that just make the constituent, just educate the constituent rather than getting your actual work of planning the streets done?
Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty hard to quantify. I mean, with our request of 3 FTEs, that's based on what we've been hearing, and and just what I'm observing of staff time. We've any given time we have probably 8 staff members that are touching traffic calming issues in some way or another. And so I mean that's really hard to quantify how much of their time exactly. But these staff tentatively, if we moved ahead with this, I would actually have them report to the manager over safety, so it would be its own team, really separate from Jeff Goulden's team, which does the project delivery, the project management. And so it would really help to because then you'd have specific people that can handle those requests. And and part of this would be we'd be learning all together that I think we have Laura's work I think would set us up really well to get a good running start at this. But I can guarantee if we get this program going 2 to 3 years from now, it will look a little bit different than we thought it would, because you get going and you make adjustments, and kind of Councilmember Romano, your idea of processes and intake forms and things that to help streamline it. And I'm sure we'd be able to figure out some of those things and make tweaks so that it felt fair and everyone was heard. I think that's a big part of this, is making sure that when people have these concerns right now, it's we're having to pull from other resources to address them, but having dedicated staff would be an absolute game changer, as far as having people that this is all they think about all day, is how do we make our streets more, specifically residential streets, more livable in the city. And that's really powerful when you're able to do that. And then we have a group to channel these concerns to.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
John, I guess I'm a little disappointed. I definitely love this program and want to see it go forward, and definitely fund it as needed. But just much like Councilmember Dugan's point, how can we be more proactive and actually design streets that don't need to be retrofitted to be safe? I mean, we know that our residential streets are way too being traveled at far too high a speed. How can we get ahead of it, like Councilmember Wharton said, and be able to free up staff time by, as we're rebuilding roads, using funding our future monies right now, doing it in a way that it won't need to be retrofitted all too soon?
Yeah, Councilmember Ferris, I really appreciate that question and comment. That we are trying to do that with a lot of the complete street transformations that are happening and that council has funded in recent years. The 600 North project, I think, is a great example of that. The 9 South project, where we're reducing almost by half the width of the pavement in order to get an urban trail, really tight turn radii, so that people turning on and off the street have to really slow down. And every opportunity we get when we touch a street, we try to make it safe, particularly for the most vulnerable users, which are, people walking or biking. So that's absolutely a top priority for us.
And I do love where those projects are going. Can we have just at least a handful of definite steps, whether it's not speed bumps, but dips or traffic signs, speed monitor signs? I mean, something to an a la carte menu to be able to choose from that we can implement in more places more quickly, like what Councilmember Romano was saying, a shorter term, quicker response, something that can get us somewhere quickly, even if it's not quite all the way, but relatively cheaply.
Yeah, absolutely. And the toolkit that Laura and her team developed, if you look at each potential tool in the toolkit, and that's not an exhaustive list, but each one is identified as ones that can be permanent implement, kind of the higher cost permanent installations versus the kind of the quick action installations. But again, it takes a lot of staff time. It's almost the same amount, sometimes even more staff time to do the quick installation as the permanent ones. But I'm hoping that if we can get a good rhythm, kind of like what Councilmember Wharton was alluding to, I think that you get some proven stuff in the city that people feel comfortable with, that maybe we can go faster with some of those lower cost things in particular. So, I think someone mentioned, maybe some sort of hybrid where we still keep the slow churn of the more permanent things, but then be covering as much ground as possible with some of the low cost quick action items. That's something that, I would absolutely embrace.
Thank you.
Sorry, Dennis, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Cindy, did you have something?
Yes, you've talked a lot about the collaboration with other departments, which is really great. So a couple of things. One is and you may have already mentioned this and I missed it, but have you looked at the potential to collaborate when streets are just being resurfaced? Just the very basic resurfacing, because I think quite a bit of the funding our future interest from the public is in getting their streets out of the very poor condition that they're in. So does your program contemplate any way to collaborate on that level? And then a second question I had, because I'm just not clear, is engineering, would these projects go through engineering at all, or would they be managed fully from your department?
Yeah, those are some great questions. So anything that requires that, and it gets a little bit of a gray area, anything that becomes construction goes through engineering, but the quick action stuff we'd be able to it would be managed by the transportation division. And then to the resurfacing question, yeah, there's a lot you can do with paint and delineators. And I think a great example of that is you may have noticed on 2nd East from going south from about, I think we got it all the way up to 4th South, all the way to 9th South. Just this last month, we didn't need 2 lanes of travel, vehicular travel in each direction to handle the traffic, because it peels off, to get onto the freeway. And so we narrowed it up, put in angled parking in the middle of the street, worked closely with the fire department to make sure the design met their needs, and added in really high comfort bike lanes. And so it was, we rarely get everyone happy, but it just it changed the whole feel of that street. It's a lot more, it feels a lot more kind of people oriented. It's a lot harder to, you know, to drag race on it now because it, with the angled parking and the buffered bike lanes, you kind of have to be alert as a driver and really watch out for people. And that was relatively low cost. At the same time, we also redid 3rd East. And this was in close collaboration with Streets. I need to give them a lot of credit because it's kind of a headache for them because they can't just go full steam. They have to slow down a little bit, shuffle things to be able to collaborate with us, and they were an awesome partner. But we did 2nd and 3rd East at the same time, and kind of refreshed the design. 3rd East was our first experiment as a city 10 years ago in a parking protected bike lane. And we got a lot of feedback that that neighborhood kind of felt like we were just experimenting on them and it was kind of ugly. I think this new design is a lot more clean. It looks really nice. We did both of those streets. The extra paint that we had to add on above and beyond what Streets did, they did the long straight lines, but that was about $70,000 for about a mile's worth of kind of street transformation with paint only.
Okay. And what I'm wondering is if you already feel like you've maximized the opportunity for that within your current plan, or if it's worth, in light of the funding limitations, is it worth taking a little bit of an extra look at how you can coordinate with that Funding Our Future money that is designed for the street repair and street paving, to add to that to get the better product that you're looking at? Sorry, that would be my dog.
Dog's endorsing the conversation, right? Yeah, I feel like we've pretty much maximized. We pretty much maximized what we can do with that right now. I feel like we're taking full advantage of those opportunities.
The staffing problem of engineering. So, to the caveat that anything that includes engineering would be the construction, which would mean we would need to get them some help.
Yeah, that's good.
Financially, probably.
Orion, Noel, you hopped on. Was there something that you wanted to say? Maybe not. Okay.
No, I'm good.
Council members, anything else right now? Allison?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to mention, I think there was some, I don't know if it was underlying or overlapping conversation just now about the question of whether council members are on board with the idea of the systematic prioritization. In other words, taking data and using data to decide where in the city these sort of efforts should be focused, versus something like going through the CIP process, which, as we know, tends to favor groups of neighbors who are organized enough and experienced enough to be able to put CIP requests forward. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think the underlying idea of this program is to tend more toward this prioritization based on a number of data sources that are mentioned in the report. It is a different, so there may be some additional dilemmas provoked by moving from that to more of a CIP request model.
Allison,
Looks like Cindy wants to
sorry, just to
improve that.
clarify, I think you don't, I don't think it would require community applications in order to go through CIP, because the departments often put through CIP requests. So in suggesting that we keep the process whole, I was not suggesting that we have it be based on the constituent approach, because as you say, that inserts a bias toward people who have the time and sophistication to go through that process. But so I'm suggesting that the administration could put it through that process, so that there's the opportunity to maximize the funding through the Funding Our Future, the CIP, Class C road funds, and all the others. So just to clarify, that was my thinking. I wasn't suggesting the wholesale community applications.
Great, thank you. So I just want to wrap up here. I think this was a good discussion. I want to say thank you to everyone that was involved in this project. It has been a long time coming, and clearly it really is one of the #1 things that I think every single one of us hear from our constituents, and is incredibly important. What I would like to see are a couple of things. I would love to see some, whether it be through the CIP, whether it be a line item, a real budget request for this, for us for next year. I think, to Cindy's point, trying to find the money in the FTEs right now may be a little difficult, as we're already, I don't know, my calendar's already at December, so that's where my head goes, right? But I would love to be able to figure out a way to annually fund this team, this dedicated team, as you mentioned, John, where this is all they think about. I mean, I'm sure it's what most of your department thinks about all the time anyway, but has all of these other projects to work on. And I would love to really just see, how do we implement this in this team-oriented, dedicated way, where we know, and I think this does fall in with Funding Our Future, dollars and street dollars through, it kind of almost hits all 4 of the buckets that we have named out of Funding Our Future, right? And in some ways, I think that you could say it would hit the affordable housing bucket in creating walkable, livable, accessible places to live, right? I think we could justify pulling money almost from all 4 buckets for something like this. And I'd really love to see what this would look like. The other thing yes, Darren?
Oh, I just wanted to say, yes, Amy, I agree with you. And I think that your funding request should be big. I think give us what it would cost to actually do it faster than 1/113th of the city per year, because I think we need to go faster than that. So I, for my part, would like to see a big request that we can then scale back if there are other issues. But I would say start bigger than
And
2 zones a year.
You're here.
So the other thing I would like to say as we wrap up is that I'm really concerned, and I think that we've been on this discussion for quite some time, so I do want to wrap up. I'm not going to have any more comments or questions right now. This has been a robust discussion. I appreciate it. And I think we can schedule more time if need be. Sorry, my dog is upset for some reason. But I am really interested in the policy questions that staff suggested regarding equity, both socioeconomic equity and racial equity within our city, and how we're prioritizing that and how you're looking at that through the data points that you gave us with how these zones have been prioritized, right? With those are very measurable data points, how many crashes, how many people were involved, that kind of measurable, if you will. But there's another piece to this, and I really want to make sure that we are looking at that prioritization through that equity lens. And so if I could ask maybe just, and they don't have to be long answers, but maybe just some written answers to those policy questions that are in the staff report, that would be helpful, just as we continue maybe this discussion in the future and have kind of a better idea of how we're funding this and where we're funding it from, and these kind of different ideas. But clearly this is a priority, and I really want to thank you for all of the work on this. And you know, to your point, John, I think once we get that dedicated team, we start to understand and start moving, it won't necessarily seem like such a big endeavor, but will rather just sort of be part of the framework and fabric of what your department does, right? And so I think we'll get there, and this is a huge step in getting there, and I appreciate that. Okay, thanks so much. Ashley Hadfield, from our earlier discussion, we were early on getting to her, and this is in agenda item number 4 of the ordinance change up at the University Ivory zoning map, is here and logged on and has been patiently waiting. And so I'd like to turn the time over to her and give 5 minutes to the applicants to address this zoning map amendment. And again, thank you for logging on early and then sitting through a very long discussion, interesting, but long discussion after. So thank you, and I'll turn the time over to you. I don't hear any sound if you're talking.
Okay, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and thanks for letting us hop on here.
Thank you, Council Chair Feller. My name is Scott Bates, and we are excited to have this opportunity to present and appreciate you allocating some time. I'm going to introduce the Clark and Christine Ivory Foundation and part of their mission, because part of what makes this project really exciting really are 2 things. We view it as an innovative public-private partnership type of project, and there's a component of it that's really unique. The foundation, being the developer, will donate all the net profits from the project to a special scholarship fund at the University of Utah to provide scholarships for students for the next 100 years. We estimate that thousands, if not tens of thousands of scholarships will result from this project. And there are 2 main missions of the foundation, and that is to provide educational opportunities and affordable housing opportunities. So obviously this one's sort of a mix of both. The partnership really is between the University of Utah, which will provide a special scholarship fund, Salt Lake City, which has been very helpful so far in making this project happen, in improving our rezone. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who has agreed to demolish an existing church and lease the ground to the foundation, and then of course the foundation, who will develop, build, and fund the project. So there are 2 critical needs at the U. One is student housing, and this slide illustrates that need. Our project, I think, will meet this one, and how will it do that? The University House project will provide 536 students an academically focused, safe living environment to pursue their educational goals. In addition, those students, through this unique, innovative project, will help the foundation and the University of Utah provide scholarships to students most in need. To date, since 2003, the Ivory Foundation has provided over 5,800 scholarships to students most in need. And when I say most in need, the focus has been on first-generation students who have never been to college, their family members have never been to college, or hardship students who have had to drop out due to some unforeseen financial hardship. The foundation invites those students to re-enter the university and complete their degrees, and funds scholarships for that. This University House donation cycle on this screen simply illustrates how this will work. The students who pay around the University House will result in profits to the foundation, which will then be donated to a special university fund at a scholarship fund at the U. And that will, for the next 100 years, which is the term of the ground lease, provide scholarships to these students. So with that, I'd like to turn the time back over to Ashley Hadfield, who's been the project manager on this, and she'll discuss the project in detail and the details of our rezoning application. And thank you for your time.
So I think the first thing that we're really excited about is that there could not be a better location for this project. It's kitty corner Mario Capecchi and South Campus Drive. There's a lot of great benefits as it's for the youth students, as it's across the street, and then it's located at the tracks. And then for Salt Lake City residents, this will help reduce daily student commuters up to campus as it's bringing them closer to campus, and help increase housing stock as we're moving these students closer and they're not spilling out into the neighboring subdivisions. The three things to know is that when we went to design this, we did three main things. And one was we reviewed existing structures, as we wanted to make sure that we are paying homage and wanting to blend in well with the campus. Second thing is that we engaged current and recent graduated students to make sure this was a place that they wanted to live in and what they could be excited about. And the third is that we went nationally to find what the trends are going in. And so the first thing that we learned going nationally was that a need for safe and secure open spaces for students. And so this is kind of where the design came from for having these 4 buildings. The second big critical need was having really good programmed common area spaces. And you can see an example of one of our wings. You have this middle common core and then these house rooms on the top floor where students can come in and gather. And there's some examples below. And then the third thing that we learned was that there's a lot of advantages to student single living. And this is something that we're seeing nationally come in. So here's an example of what these units will look like. There's studio units. Each student will have their own bathroom and a kitchen and kitchenette and some study spaces. So this is just great because it's no roommate drama and they can focus on their studies, but still go into those common areas and kind of get that much needed interaction that we all kind of experience in college. So we're excited to be together with you as you're kind of our next step on fulfilling our mission to providing these scholarships for students. We're here today seeking a rezone from the institution of the RMU, which will allow us to build this. And then just for a note too, during Planning Commission, we did submit a plan development.
Time.
Sorry, we generally only give 5 minutes as a presentation. This is amazing and I appreciate it so very much. If I may, can you forward this along to our council staff so that we can continue looking at it? And I am going to see if any council members have any questions for you.
Perfect.
Anna?
Yeah, so the last point that you made said exception to not build the building towards the street. Exception to build housing that doesn't face a public street. There you go. Why is that?
It was because as we were looking at the design of this, it was for this back building that you see right here. And this just allowed us to kind of create that secure common area that was kind of secured in. And so that's why we kind of moved forward with that design that way.
It does tie in, however, with the other 3 buildings from the sidewalk through a common walkway area that you can see there to the west, northwest.
You know, I used to live in the dorms when I came here, and yeah, it does feel like a campus, right? Like it does feel, it has that feeling, but it also feels like excluded from the world. Like, you know, I'm more of the thought that I would be, you know, switching and trying to make it so that people can see other people walking, you know, on the sidewalk. If I'm walking alone by myself at night, trying to get to my dorm, I'd rather see people out right there on the street than inside, right? But that's just personal, just my opinion on that one. But this is great overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council member, any other questions? Council members, plural. I don't see anything. Thank you again so much for your patience and then for being here with us.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council members, on our agenda, we are about 20 minutes ahead and we would be taking a break. I would like to take a break right now. Let's take about a 20-minute break and I'll work with staff to see if we can get our next agenda people here about 20 minutes early. So we, instead of breaking at 4:20, we'll come back at 4:20 and continue our agenda there. Does that work for everybody? Perfect. Thanks so much. See you soon. and I appreciate starting a little bit early. I always think that means we're going to end early, but then something happens that we continue, that we don't. It's actually like a jinx on us. Anyway, we are here with the item number 7, which is the Enterprise Resource Planning Project update. And we have Jennifer Bruno from City Council, our City Council Deputy Director, and Noel Walkingshaw, our Chief Innovation Officer. Lisa Schaefer, our Chief Administrative Officer, is also here. So I'll first turn the time over to Jen. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think that the timing of this briefing is a good one. This is sort of the official kickoff, if you will, to actually launching this project that has been discussed for many years. I'll kind of frame it from the council perspective, since that's kind of the role I play on the team. And really, over the years, the council has been interested and sometimes frustrated in evaluating the budget because we're limited by the data that we collect and how we collect it and how we keep it and how we manage it. And so that has caused a few times during the budget process for us to get a little frustrated with not being able to evaluate programs against each other, right, in the budget process and make those adjustments. And a lot of it has to do with how we collect and manage data. Because of the way that the city's financial system is structured and all the dozens of programs, literally dozens of programs that collect data for different functions in the city, that analysis is not always possible. And it's not that we don't want to do the analysis. It's not that the administrative staff is resistant to the analysis. It's that we literally don't keep and collect and track the data in the way that we could. So the council funding this ERP and kind of officially kicking it off is putting us on this path to being able to look at the city's data in a way to actually make informed decisions with it and communicate it to the public, which is probably a second most important goal here. So now I'll turn it over to Noel and Lisa, who are kind of the real heroes of this project, for more detail.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you, council members. Thanks for giving us some time to brief you on where we are so far in this project. About a year ago, we started preparing our systems and probably more importantly, our people for this huge change. And we have finally selected our ERP software provider. And we've started the implementation and we're going to officially kick that off tomorrow. But, you know, we've been talking about enterprise resource planning, ERP, forever. But really, what I want you to take away from this is exactly what Jen was talking about. It's people, it's assets, and it's money. And currently, the systems that we have are decentralized, disconnected from each other, and very difficult to provide, to access, and to provide you the information that you so often ask for. So if you take nothing else away from it, this is what it's about. It's about people, it's about assets, and it's about money. And before I turn it over to Noel, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge some really key people that have helped us get to this point. And, you know, I want you all to know that eventually this software and the implementation of it will touch every single employee. So we're over 3,000 strong. And this is huge. This is one of the biggest software implementations any organizations can undertake. And so I wanted to take a minute and just thank a few people that have gotten us to this point. But believe me, everybody's going to touch it at some point. So in our data area, I wanted to say thank you to Quint Barron, Karina Curtis, Keith Clemis, and Richard Rutledge. In our business process area, I wanted to say thank you to Keith Clemis again and Brian Ledbetter. Under change management, which by the way, we've invested a tremendous amount of time investing in our people so that they can be prepared to undertake this huge change. I wanted to say thank you to Suzanne Swanson, Arturo Garcia, and Kristen Elder. And in our chart of accounts work, I wanted to say thank you to Teresa Beckstrand and Richard Rutledge. These folks, in addition to our enterprise team and our innovations team, are really leading the charge on making us successful in this endeavor. And so with that, I just wanted to say thank you to them, but also turn the time over to Noel to kind of give you an update on where we are in the process.
And Noel, before you begin, are we nicknaming this system Pam?
People, assets, and money.
Uh-huh.
I love it. I love it.
feel like
Maybe there
then
should
we
be
can say, have you talked to Pam?
That could be. It's the future Dave. Okay, well, we'll get started. And Taylor, are you our driver of the presentation? Okay, thanks. If you could go, I'm going to jump around. If you could go to slide 5, because I think it's helpful. I just want to kind of remind everyone what an ERP is, and simply it's just a consolidated system that manages our employees, the people, the payroll, the HR, our assets, which is all of the things we own. There are a lot of accounting rules that go against the things that we own and manage, and then the money, right? Which is the revenue, the expenses. PAM, right? That's a great way to remember it. You can see this is sort of the future state of where we want to go. And we developed this illustration before we had selected Workday. We had a vision in mind of what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to have as much of a common data structure as we could, so that we had those common abilities to report and to do our work, and to minimize all of the various integrations and disconnection that we can experience today, and Jen alluded to. If you could go back to slide 2 now, that would be fine. So why Workday? So Workday is what we selected through our selection process, and we've done that because they are a global leader in this marketplace. It's a cloud-based solution, so it's not resting on servers in our closets. It's up in the cloud. It's software as a service, and so the development, the management, the maintenance of it is done by Workday. Recently, we implemented Cartograph, which is a software as a service type program as well. And with these types of services, the software itself drives much of the structure of how those are managed. And so while traditionally when we built or developed or implemented a piece of software, we would design it to fit how we did it. With a software as a service type model, we need to start doing process realignment, right? We start working our way to best practices. Another real key objective for us was that uniform consistency. And Workday does that through what they call their FDM, the Foundation Data Model. And you'll hear more about that. And I want to talk a little bit about that with the work that we're doing with GFOA and how that comes together and how that hits on the pieces that Jen discussed. To support us is a group called AVAP, and they're an implementation leader that focuses on Workday, and they focus on government implementations, and that was important to us. Someone that had a good understanding of the type of work that we did. And they will help us with the configurations of the system. They will also help us with the training and the knowledge transfer that we need in order to continue and maintain this project moving forward. Because really what those implementations do is they just set that foundation. And so it's really important for us to have a good solid team of people that can help drive those business objectives. And we've done that, thanks in large part to the council and the staffing that we were able to receive. Lisa brought up organizational change and organizational readiness. While we're just kicking off the project, we've been working on it for a while, and what we've really focused on is organizational readiness, getting the city ready for this change. And so we started with change management. A group of us went through and became certified change managers, and we really built a foundation around our project plan around change management, supporting how we communicate what it is we're trying to do. We built a strong sponsor coalition with Lisa and Aaron and Jen and Deb and Mary Beth, so that we were really just staying focused not only on the business objectives, but also effectively communicating with them so that they can support the project in the way that the project needs to be supported. In line with our selection process, we also led an effort on business process documentation. So we came into this having our finance processes documented, having our HR processes documented. We took time to identify policies that are supporting those processes and also areas where maybe we could see some improvement. We wanted to do that because we didn't want to have those first conversations with the vendor being the first time we sat down and thought about it. And we'll talk a little bit more in a second about the work we're doing with GFOA and sort of a moment of reflection that we're doing in front of these configurations as well. And then we did some data readiness. Lisa said thanks to some folks that did a lot of hard work over this last year, getting our data ready for a new system, identifying all the different data sets. We've got a little data warehouse where we can publish that information. We can work on cleaning up that information, and we can get that information ready for the new system. And in large part because of that work, we should have what's called a foundational tenant with Workday by the end of this week. And so we'll have a Workday environment that houses our HR and our payroll information. And so as we go into these architecture sessions in the next month and a half or so, we will be able to work through those various processes that we've documented and look at the system using our information to see how best to configure that and what that experience is going to be like. And so I think that will really help us. It will feel less like we're just writing boxes on a piece of paper, which is kind of where we start sometimes. GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association. We created a third relationship as a part of this project. And one of the real reasons for that was we needed some support on best practices and helping us get our ducks lined up. Let's just say it that way. The chart of accounts is one part that we are working with the GFOA on. And for those, I'll just not assume that you know what the chart of accounts is, but the chart of accounts is sort of the financial structure of our accounting, how we separate the money into projects and programs and cost centers and object codes and revenue funds and accounts and all of that stuff. In 1993, when we implemented the system that we have now, we didn't go through a process of restructuring our chart of accounts. So the chart of accounts we use today is generations old. And we knew that in order to really achieve what we want to achieve with this project, we needed to revisit that. We needed to modernize our chart of accounts. So the GFOA is working with us, and we've met with I would say almost every finance manager and cabinet member. If we haven't met with you yet, we will be meeting with them soon to go through this chart of accounts, to start restructuring how we structure that. And this chart of accounts plays a really important role in Workday because it becomes the foundation data model. It becomes sort of that resting platform for which we start drawing all of those pieces of data in which we want to start reporting. So this exercise is really important. It allows us to introduce, you know, I was listening to some of the stuff around our infrastructure development. And so it allows us to do program-based accounting, right? It's a theme of work that we want to do ongoing, and we can start attaching all of those various efforts that associate to that program within the system, so we can start getting good true costs. And it allows us to do improved project-based accounting, things that come to an end. We build it, we complete the task, all of the efforts that associate with that, including, you know, the invoices and accounts and payable things like that. So that's really important. With GFOA, we're working on some process review. We're developing what's called a PIT team, a process improvement teams. And these are those moments of reflection, right? It's just that guided conversation between the business process work we did, having a third party that knows government finance, government business well, help us through some of those conversations to just help us get to a little bit better state, so that as we go into these configuration sessions, we are doing better, right? We get it closer to right the first time. We can always come back and make changes, but we get closer to right the first time, and that's going to be really important. I think that the other part that I want to talk a little bit about is the team that we've developed around this. In the last budget, we asked for a position called an ETSM, Enterprise Technology Solution Manager. And a big part of why we asked for that is because not only do we want to implement this project, but we need to plan for the future, right? And really structure ourselves so that we're successful in that. And we're happy to announce that Scott Black accepted that position last week. And so we're in that process. He is moving into that position, and we're establishing this future administration team as we go forward with this implementation. And so the idea there is that when we get done with this, we will have a good knowledge transfer to our staff so that we can really administrate this project well. Our sponsors, I want to bring back to the sponsors, right? And the value of a big project like this is having sponsors. They become super important, right? You know, Lisa, Deb Alexander, Mary Beth, Jen, and Aaron become very important to this project. And it's very important that we keep them in loop on this project as we go forward, because it really helps our success on something that takes so much energy and so much financial and resource commitment. So we also developed a formal project charter, and I think you've seen that attached, and you can look through that and to see how we've structured not only our team, but the roles and the responsibilities. We've structured how we're going to be making decisions when conflict arises, how we're going to be making decisions when we just don't really know which way to go. We've set a roadmap for supporting those decisions so that we can effectively move these things forward. And we will be working, you know, the innovation team, we will be working not only to support the implementation, but we're also trying to work forward. We're trying to stay a couple months in front of that to help clear away any roadblocks that may happen relating to a policy or a procedure or some timing of some event, so that we can really start to take that and keep the implementation moving forward and on time. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this gives you a nice outline as to the project scope, and you can see it's we've got a lot going on, and it's being done in a way that is, I would describe as expedited. Our goal for human capital management, HR, payroll, and some of the analytics that we want to do is next July. Our payroll team as we're going and trying to adopt a budget in parallel, we will also be trying to shift our employees over to punching into a new system. We will be trying to test and capture all of that pieces of information. And so that's why this team is so important, to really help communicate that. But it's going to be a really stressful May and June for us next year, in parallel to all the other things that we're doing. So please be patient with us on that. February, we get started on the finance, which is phase 2. We will be doing what we have been doing for the last little while, which will be the planning and organizing and getting the structure together to be successful as we go into these architecture phases. Our objective there will be January or Christmas 2022, January 1, 2023, moving forward with the new financial system. So it's a pretty aggressive schedule. And then I just kind of to wrap up, tomorrow we're having our kickoff meeting at 1 o'clock. We will have some folks talking about it and giving us a little bit of encouragement. And then there will be about a 2.5-hour presentation where we take a really deep dive into the scope of the work, how we're going to do that, and our core team will be invited to that so that we all can kind of come together on the same page. And if you're interested in joining us, just let us know. And you can sit in on that. That's what I have.
Thank you, Noel. Council members, do you have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Anna.
This is a lot, no? And Lisa and everybody else. Oh my goodness. But just to kind of bring it down to my understanding in simple words, like how is this going to change? Like how are we going to see a change with all of this? That it's obviously streamlining things and modernizing our processes. So what can I expect as a council member of this project?
Well, your interactions with HR will be completely different, right? How you punch in, well, you don't punch in or punch out, but your time cards and how we manage those, how you access your employee profile. So every city employee will see that, like anything that you relate to that are the view of our HR world will dramatically change. And that's in the first phase, right? We're focused on HR and we're focused on payroll. So those initial phases will really about any association really that you have with HR will largely be managed through this new system. You will have improved access through data, through mobile devices, things of that nature.
If I could add, I'm sorry. Just because I
just wanted
know
to say,
what. Oh, sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead, Jen. You go first.
You go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to chime in because I think that the council has a very different view of our systems than our employees. And from my perspective, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that the council will notice most of the differences in terms of how the administration or council staff are able to answer your questions about how much money do we spend on North Temple? How much money do we spend maintaining this park versus that park? If we wanted to give a raise to these kinds of employees, but not those kinds of employees, how would we do that? Or how much would that cost? Right? Like a lot of those are questions that we can't quite answer right now because of the way we collect data. But once we have the system, and I think that it was helpful for Noel to show that timeline, because I'm just going to say right now to set the expectation that we will not be able to answer that for this coming budget. So it's going to be next year. But it's that sort of like light at the end of the tunnel, right? Where like, that's what I see as in terms of what you guys will see differently from the way we live now versus the way we'll live after all of this work is done. From an employee side, there's a ton of different benefits, but go ahead, Lisa, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's really awkward that Noel just kind of spilled the beans that one of the best practices is that council members now have to punch in. So that's going to be,
sorry.
I'm just kidding. No, you're not supposed to spill those beans. No, I wanted to bring it down to kind of a real life example that has been very recently in front of you all, which was the matrix audit that was done on the police department budget. And, you know, if you read the audit, which I'm sure you did, one of the items that was pointed out was that our financial systems really have no way of reporting back the things that you're actually asking for in the council meetings and that the community is asking for. And one of the reasons for that is exactly what Noel was describing. Our chart of accounts do not allow for that type of accounting currently in our system. And so that's a real life example of when you want to know how much does a thing cost, a program cost, or a project cost. Currently, our system doesn't have any way of connecting those dots for you. So when you're asking for how much does X cost in the police department, can't get it. But in the new system, based on the chart of accounts work and all of the good work that these people are doing, you'll be able to get that kind of reporting. And I wanted to say also, one of the really nice benefits of transitioning to a modern system like this is that not only will you have access to that information, but we are going to be far more transparent to the community and the citizens about how we do what we do. So this is a really, really cool benefit of all of this hard work. And look for that time clock in the council office soon.
Awesome. Thank you. Great stuff.
Darren?
So if I ask in 2 years John Larson how much time his staff spends on traffic calming, will it answer that question or not quite?
It could.
It could absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that knowing that those are the kinds of questions that you want to be able to answer is what helps what the work that GFOA is doing with us. It's sort of like, in order to set up collecting the data, you have to know the question you're going to ask, right? Like, we need to know like how to collect the data in order to know that it will provide us this or that answer. And so I think that the experience with the matrix audit is exactly what showed us that we need to collect even our salary data in a slightly different way than we do now, right? Because a lot of it is not just I paid $200 for this traffic cone, but it's I spent 40 hours, which equals how much in terms of the salary of that employee. And I think a lot of our questions about homelessness and policing and outreach and stuff like that relate to that as well. And so that's what's been so great, having Noel pulling together this sort of interdisciplinary team to kind of lay out all of those questions, right? So it's not just that I've had these questions in my mind for 10 years of, I would love it to be able to answer this question for the council. Different departments also have been collecting all of their, if only I could answer, or if only I could look at my budget this way, I would do my job better, or I could do my job more efficiently, things like that. So every department has examples of those. It's been fascinating.
That's great. And that's one of the things, I mean, the police department already does a good job, like collecting how many calls, they get at a park for service or around an HRC for service. And that's something that I would, love to keep working on and really collecting and understanding where our services are going so that we can improve where we need to improve, right? And we can allocate where we need to allocate. And yeah, the traffic calming is one of the examples that all council members, we hear from our constituents all the time. And so that's a question that we need to know. How much time is staff spending on this, right? Because obviously it might require staff to manage all of these costs. So thank you. This is great.
And I'll just say, because this is a one singular database, if we were to create a tag called traffic calming, let's say there was a tag called traffic calming, and we were using that in transportation or in streets or in parks or some other area, the report's going to gather the information from all of those areas, right? It's no longer siloed information. So that's why that new chart of account structure becomes so important. You think of a program, traffic calming, a project, we put in some speed bumps, and then maybe some effort around an element of traffic calming could be a tag. I mean, someone right now in the background is just like going, no, you're getting too ahead of yourself. But that's kind of the formation of how that works, right? And you can see how those elements can start fitting into other areas, and we don't have that same siloed information because we have this uniform database.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I also just wanted to say that I hope that you all picked up on the fact that the chart of accounts that we're working from currently in our system is generations old. We did not do this work in 1993. And think about what you were doing in 1993. That's how old our current system is. And our chart of accounts is older than that. So what we're doing here is just transformational. This is really going to bring us into the 21st century and really provide us with the information that we all want so desperately. Mayor, hi.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, of course.
I
Thank you.
I think as city nerds, we're all kind of like maybe geeking out over what this is and how tremendous it is. And I want to just give my thanks to Jennifer Bruno and Noel and Lisa, who collectively have decades of city experience, and that without this institutional knowledge in our city government in both branches, we wouldn't know how messed up it is and what the history of Frankensteining systems is and how it really should be going forward. So hats off to all of the collective wisdom in both branches of government that is able to finally like push this rock over the top of the hill that's been burying our people for a really long time. It's a very cool thing. Good job, guys.
Thank you. And Dan, you can keep
Madam Chair.
raising your hand.
Thank you, no problems. This is a huge undertaking. I mean, especially for a city government and so many projects out there and so many people doing thousands of things. It's more than just a small company. And I applaud you for doing that because it is necessary. A couple things that just, I know you're working on is the training side of the house and the ongoing training of the system. And is there and probably working, and hopefully you're working on some type of audit system, internal audit system, so that we know that we're not falling back. Excel does a lot of great things and people start going back to Excel because that's what they know. So how we make sure that we actually audit that we're using this ERP system and not falling back in other areas, and then we're not collecting the street calming things because we don't have the right charge code for it, and we start putting it under miscellaneous. So hopefully Workday already understands this, and we're focused on that also, because that long term that makes it a success.
Absolutely. And that's really a big part of our focus on change management, right? Is that organizational change. The adoption of the system is our success, right? The resistance. We've done change management is a fascinating field of study, and we're finding where our paths of resistance are and where we need to make an extra effort to communicate why it's so important to have sponsors and the role that they play to effectively communicate these goals and objectives. Yes, we're being very mindful of that. That's our end game.
Well, I look forward to using Pam and just making that nickname stick somehow. So thank you so much for all your hard work. Council members, are there any final questions or comments for the team? Seriously, I think this is an amazing endeavor, and really truly appreciate all of the hard work that has gone into this and the dedication that's gone into this and the creativity that has gone into this, the forethought of really bringing us to the 21st century. And I don't know where I'm at today. So I look forward to it. I will see you tomorrow at the launch. And thank you so much for your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Team, we are now on agenda item number 8. That is the technology-related land use text amendments. And at the table, we have Nick Tarbett, and I believe Nick Norris will be, yes, I see Nick Norris over there. So I will turn the time over to Nick Tarbett.
All right, thank you. We go from one great technology discussion to another, I guess. This proposal would amend various sections of Title 21A pertaining to technology-related land uses. This proposal was initiated by Mayor Mendenhall to promote the development of technology-related industry in the city. The proposal impacts zoning districts citywide and impacts multiple sections of 21A. And I don't want to steal any more of Nick's thunder, so I will turn the time over to him so that he can give the details on those.
I should have a presentation slides if people want to load them. There we go. But while this is loading, and Nick touched on this a little bit, but the purpose of this proposal is to do a couple of things. First is to update and implement some of our master plans related to economic development, and also to implement one of the mayor's goals for 2021 of creating Tech Lake City. And this is a big part of that because it enables those uses and that endeavor to happen, particularly along some of our corridors that we are seeing, and we hope to see some revitalization and some change and some vacant spaces filled up. Can you go to the next slide, please? So basically, this proposal does three things: is that it adds new land uses for biomedical facilities, technology facilities, data centers. It modifies existing land use definitions, medical laboratories, which there's like 6 or 7 different slightly modified terms and definitions in our code. And with research and development facilities, which there's also multiple different terms in our code. So that part tries to clean those up. And it's related to this because of some of the uses that we're adding, that we wanted to make sure that there are some separation between these uses. And it also updates the land use table. So it deletes those repetitive uses that I just talked about, but also adds the new uses to the table. Next slide. Next slide. So the definition for a biomedical facility, you can see it on your screen. Basically, these are uses that are involved typically in the field of medicine and produce either biologic, biomedical, or pharmaceutical products. We tend to want to use general definitions as defined in our code for this because they're intended to be fairly broad. And when we do that, we want to make sure that we're adding things that uses that a biomedical facility is not, which is what our code directs us to do. And so we've included some of these uses in the definition so that it's clear that if somebody were to come in and say, no, I'm a medical office, I'm not a biomedical facility, or vice versa. So it creates, similar to what I said earlier, some separation between uses. Next slide. So this is, I don't know how well you can read this, but basically the biomedical facilities would be allowed in every place on that map that is shown in blue. And so you can see that it's mostly, most of that area is our industrial areas, which one of the benefits of these types of uses too is that it diversifies the types of land uses that we're seeing occupy our light industrial area in particular. And so that tends to be a little bit, helps to address some of the monotony that we're seeing as far as logistics and things like that. So it creates some added spaces for these uses. And then just for reference, not that I'm going to go through that big long list of zoning districts where these are permitted, but it's meant to give you an idea of those zoning districts that are in the ordinance of where these would be permitted. We proposed all of these to be permitted because the impacts in almost every situation is similar to other uses that are already in the zoning district. There's one exception to this, and as we have discovered in some of our research and reviewing some of the proposals we've had, is that sometimes biomedical facilities can produce hazardous or radioactive waste. And so in the interest of environmental justice and preserving our neighborhoods, the proposal that was from the planning division and agreed to by the planning commission is that if they produce one of those two things, that they are prohibited within half mile of residential use. It's important that that's not a residential zone. So that would be address most of the livable areas in the city where residential uses are occurring, which are mostly on the east side of I-215, with the exception of a few spots here and there where there are some residential uses, particularly in the agricultural zones, and some spotted small residential uses out in the industrial area where we have maybe 4 or 5. Next slide. Moving on to technology facilities, you can go to the next slide. This definition is also fairly broad. And we wanted to make sure that it was broad, very intentionally, because as the word implies, technology is rapidly changing, and so are the uses that use it and what they do. And so we wanted to make sure that we were more future-proof in our code with these types of uses, so that they can be in more places. But these are basically places that use technology to either produce, deliver, maintain data, information equipment, etc. One of the things that we were asked not to include in this that we did earlier was some actual manufacturing types of things. And so we did take that out of this definition and another definition so that it's clear that these things are, when they are in residential or near residential areas and where people live, they're not as impactful. Next slide. Again, same as the other map, areas in purple is where the technology facilities would be. You can see this is a bigger list. The tables in all of these slides that you're going to see are all include the same zoning districts. And so sometimes there's a P in everywhere, sometimes there's not. And so you can see this is most of the urban area of the city and the area that is industrial in nature. Next slide. Data centers, this was something, you can go to the next slide. This is something that we added based on a couple of things, is that people wanted to make sure that there was a difference in these two uses. Oh, there's a typo in that definition, sorry. Ignored that number 281, it's a cut and paste thing. But also, as it came out of our subject, the high water consuming land use proposal that's also working its way to the city council. We wanted to make sure that these are separated out from being considered technology facilities because of their potential to be high water and high energy use. They're necessary in some places. We do have a number of them. They tend to be smaller than they are. And it also should be noted that this does not include a data center that's associated with some other business. For example, Salt Lake City, we have our own data center, right? But this wouldn't be included in that. So these would be permitted in the M1, M2, and the business park zoning districts. And that's primarily because these tend to be large footprint types of buildings with no windows or doors, there's a small handful of employees, and so they should be in those areas where they don't detract from other city goals related to walkability and making our city a more active place. Next slide. Medical related labs. So now we're starting to get, you can go to the next slide. Now we're starting to get into some of the uses that we changed. We had 5 or 6 different definitions that were related to this, but the key point here is that these are places that people go to get either medical tests or take biological samples for medical diagnosis purpose. In the past, this definition has been so broad that it's also been used for other types of things, a lot of research, but that's being accommodated through the change in the other facilities, particularly the biomedical use. And so this really is intended to be places that are close, ingrained in neighborhoods where people can go just like they're going to a doctor's office or something like that. So it's more convenient for them. Next slide. And as you'll see in this, the areas in orange, they're more widespread. You'll also see mixed in random patches of orange in neighborhoods. That's because these are also in the institutional zones. One of the reasons why they're allowed in the institutional zones is because that zone also allows things like hospitals, some medical clinics and things like that. And so this is a very related use to that. And so that's why we chose to and proposed to include those in the institutional zones. And very little impact from these types of things. These are just like going to a doctor's office for the most part. Next slide. Research and development facilities. So this is a really broad term, and I think I sent you the wrong presentation, Nick, because I swear I deleted all those numbers. But anyway, that's what happens when you're trying to do many things. But anyway, so, and I also didn't change the definition here, so I greatly apologize for that. But it is in your information. But these are facilities that basically develop and test products. Sometimes they're individual components that go into assembling a bigger project, and sometimes they're individual pieces. We do have a lot of these actually in the city. For example, we have one of these. We have a testing lab that's on 1100 East. It's a non-conforming use. So they're very general, but they don't produce impacts and nuisances. They're almost exclusively interior. And can fit in just like most other types of office uses. Next slide. And finally, again, very similar in where these are going. In fact, the colors are almost identical here. So it's very similar to the previous the medical labs facility. And I believe that's the end of my slide, my presentation.
Thank you, Nick. Council members, questions? Dan?
Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks, Nick. Two questions. One on the biomed side. Does the stormwater runoff already captured in the industrial zone? Because it says a half mile from residential. Is my concern is just stormwater runoff or water runoff or fluid runoff from a biomed if it's hazardous. Is that already tested at the site per our current land use?
Yeah, so that's a Department of Environmental Quality and an EPA requirement that Public Utilities and the State Department of DEQ deals with. If there's any outside, if it has any of those things that are identified by the state as hazardous or radioactive, they have to have a containment plan and a way to dispose of, and so it's not exposed, and it isn't entering any of our natural systems where it's our air, whether it's our air, our ground, or our water. One thing to think about in regards to those is that most hospitals that have any sort of cancer-related treatment program is producing radioactive waste, very similar to these uses. And so they go through a very extensive protocol for and monitoring for compliance of how to store, handle, and dispose and transport that. And so as we had our sustainability department review these, I think we were all comfortable with the state regulations and how that's handled, because we have experience with how they're handled in hospitals and clinics and things like that.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, one more question on the now on the data center. You know, we were talking about the 300,000 gallons per day. Is that based on square footage, one lot, one building, one company? How's that worded?
So that obviously that's a different petition that you guys are going to see. It's changed a little bit, but it's basically it's per use. So if one parcel has one use on it, that one use cannot exceed that amount. And obviously it would only apply to things moving forward. So if there's already an existing use that exceeds that, the current zoning can't be applied retroactively. So or that ordinance, if adopted, can't be applied retroactively.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chris, did you have a question?
Yes, couple. I like generally in favor of all of this and really excited about it. So I don't want you to think my questions are undermining. But I do wonder, like, why do we need these new categories as opposed to what we're using right now? And what are most of these institutions that we're trying to capture and define better? What's the most common zoning that they're using right now?
So the reason why we need to do this is that because our code does not contemplate any of these types of uses. And so we have, every time somebody has one of these uses that they're proposing, we have to try to fit them into the closest definition possible. And what ends up happening is that, one, it starts sending the message particularly for these businesses that want to locate somewhere. If we have to do that and they can look at another nearby city and there's more of a guarantee because the zoning clearly allows it, they're going to go to that city. We've experienced that. Two, the other thing that we have to do is that we have to do a ton of research and get the attorney's office involved and other people involved to actually interpret what the use is. And that sometimes can lead to an appeal process and things like that. And oftentimes we don't have a use that fits what some of these things are doing. And so it has been challenging and complicated for uses, many of which that start in Research Park, where, you know, they're not as subject to our zoning, but then they don't have anywhere in the city to go once they need more space or they outgrow it or they just need a different facility. And so they end up leaving the city altogether. And so those are the primary reasons why we are doing that. Hopefully that answered both parts of that question.
Yes. And my second question is, what are we trying to capture with technology facilities? Because I know you said it's intentionally broad, and I understand that. But to me, I'm like, in this definition, what isn't a tech facility other than a biomed facility and a research and development facility? Like, couldn't my law firm be a tech facility? Because we provide a service and that we use technology to maintain data and information, equipment, computers.
No, because we actually have a definition of an office use that specifically calls your use out. But if you were to think about for example, the Adobe facility down in Lehigh, that was a Utah, a local made company that Adobe purchased prior, that they do all kinds of data analytics for the internet out of that facility. And so they're looking at all kinds of different, how people are using data, what websites are going to, how that traffic flows. And they use that for various purposes. Sometimes it's to promote advertisement. Sometimes it's for other things. And so it's those kinds of things that they're not just automated systems. There's some human being in a place like that that's looking at the data and using it to support other types of endeavors, whatever they may be. There's lots of different facilities that do those kinds of things. Sometimes they're programming different programs, like a company like Domo, or other things that are related that support other business practices that don't squarely fit into any other land use that we have.
So, but is there any, my point, I guess, is there any danger in having it this be too broad, like that someone could take advantage of it, is there any danger of having the definition be too broad?
Well, there's always some risk when you're writing a broad definition, and we'll be upfront about that. And particularly with technology in general, because it changes daily. It's very challenging to try to write something that is broad enough to capture all of the various activities that may occur, but also address some of the other potentially more harmful types of things. And so I think that's why sometimes we do have more specific definitions in our land use code, and why we exclude certain uses from being considered for this. Generally, if we have a more specific defined use that applies, that's going to be the use that we, from a zoning perspective, that we classify that use as. And that is intended to try to, the best we can, address unintended consequences from doing this.
Okay, well, that's the only definition that makes me nervous, that makes me think maybe we could make it just a little bit tighter. But other than that, I think all these other ones are really needed, and I can think of examples right off the top of my head of wanting to have them in our city. So, but that one does make me a little nervous about the possible risk of misuse or unintended consequences.
Council members, other questions? I don't see anything else. Nick, thank you so much for your time. I think this is great. Look forward to it. And thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We are on item number 9, budget amendment number 3 for fiscal year 2021-2022. We have, I believe, our Chief Financial Officer, Mary Beth Thompson, at the table, and our City Budget Director, John Bike. So if Mary Beth is here, or John, either one, I'll let you guys take over.
I
don't know if Mary.
I'm
Oh, there
here.
she is.
I just don't know why my video isn't working. So I guess it won't work tonight.
Okay, but we'll let you take over.
So this budget amendment is for you appropriated this budget in fiscal year 2021 for SwitchPoint, but the contract did not get completed. And so we are requesting a budget amendment for a reallocation of funding that you approved in the fiscal year 2021 budget. So it's just a reallocation. It's a large sum of money. It's $2 million for SwitchPoint, but because there was not a contract completed, we felt like bringing it back to the council for transparency purposes as a housekeeping item was the most appropriate action.
Great. Council members, any questions on this? Quick and easy. Look at that, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okie dokie. Our next item.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I apologize. It's Andrew Johnston.
Hi, Andrew.
On that last item, I think we were hoping for a straw poll to allow Mary Beth and the team sort of a visible confirmation from the council that they're okay with their reallocation. SwitchPoint has been waiting for several months for the allocation, and it's sort of pivotal for them to open up. Is that possible, I guess, at this point for the council?
Thank you, Andrew. I will look to the council for a straw poll.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'll propose a straw poll that we support the budget amendment number 3 to reallocate $2 million to SwitchPoint.
Okay, council members, show your feelings.
Wait, a discussion.
Okay.
Question.
Yes.
Andrew, so can you give us a little background, like a refresher on what SwitchPoint is requesting of us and what they're going to do and where?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. So Councilmember Valdemoros and the council, Switchpoint purchased the former Airport Inn on North Temple and 2000 West, give or take, earlier this year. Their contract stipulated a certain purchase price to be paid by the end of the calendar year. They've moved forward this year in fundraising other funds, in addition to the city funds that you all agreed to earlier this year, to complete the purchase and renovation so they could reopen this month, in fact. They've been moving forward on that throughout the summertime. They do plan to reopen shortly after renovating. They'll have 100 rooms and 134 beds. They're planning on retaining it as a low-income hotel, essentially, so that residents there who are formerly homeless, who have some income, usually fixed income or some limited means, would pay a small amount towards essentially a lease on a weekly or monthly basis as a form of housing for them. They'll have some services from other service providers there, and it'll be a nice kind of setup where it won't be studio apartments necessarily because they don't have kitchenettes in them. They will have food available on site and also other options for residents there to go and purchase or make sort of options. And Switchpoint has a big plan where they've also got a social enterprise piece there about a bakery where they'll be doing some work for the community and bringing in revenue for the residents in that facility through that means.
So it's a hotel, but it's going to be used by a certain group, like exclusively, and it's not a shelter per se or a resource center.
No, council member, it's a hotel. It's in the airport overlay zone. And so they didn't pursue a rezone because it wouldn't work for residential based on that. And Switchpoint felt that there's enough people who had limited income who could essentially use it like a lot of hotels are being used for now anyway, where a lot of motels, particularly smaller ones, are used by low-income individuals who have limited income, just essentially to pay month to month or week to week and live there longer term. So that's already happening. This formalizes it in a little means, but also adds a lot of other potential services there for folks to come in and get help, or no, they can go from there out to get supportive services in the community.
Okay.
Because of that as well, generally with low-income housing, you have vouchers attached to those that subsidize the rent. As this is not formally for-market housing, they don't really have subsidies. That's why Switchpoint is doing some creative things with a small amount for people paying as a hotel would, plus a social enterprise piece where they'll have, say, a bakery where they could employ folks, generate income out of, there's a restaurant in that facility, generate income, those kind of things to subsidize the whole facility.
Okay, so who qualifies for this? Is this group within the system of our shelter of the homeless or out of our resource centers? Some of those people at the resource centers are moving there, or this is just a walk-in thing. So if I find myself in a unsheltered situation, I can just go to Switchpoint and get help. How does that all work?
Generally, these folks are going to have some income, so they could currently be in the resource centers or unsheltered on the street. A lot of folks tend to get checks at the beginning of the month, fixed income stuff. And a lot of them, say veterans, those who are over the age of 50 or 55, have regular income that way. It's just not enough to afford the current rental market. This would be long-term for those folks. They would plan on being there long-term, but because it's a hotel, you don't have a year lease or those kind of things. So it's sort of that middle piece of, it's not just a drop-in hotel. It's not sort of long-term housing. It's in that middle piece, but they do plan on having it for be very stable for folks who are living there longer term. There's a whole process to get in there. It's not just show up one night and get a room. There's an intake process. They want to know more about what's going on. for a lot of reasons. So they'll have a lot of administrative control over that facility.
Do they have, if, things got, if they experience what other HRCs experience in the city, in the neighborhood, do they have a mitigation plan like what we require right now for the shelters, for the resource centers, or not?
Well, that facility doesn't have a conditional use requirement as it's being run as a hotel ongoing based on the underlying zoning. So there's not a conditional use process there. Their plans are probably something they could speak to individually to you, but this is not a resource center in any way. Where a resource center is where anybody goes, last kind of resort. This is not that. This really is a form of housing, council member.
All right. But they are under an overlay zone. So basically, there's noise and a lot of things that they will experience because they're so close to the airport.
Yeah, I think someone else can probably speak better to the overlay zone, but essentially within that zone with the airport, there are factors that would cause residential housing to have some barriers like you're talking about, which is part of the reason why it didn't make sense to go through a long process to try and change that whole thing versus find a way to fit a need into an existing facility that wasn't being used.
All right. Thank you.
Any other discussion, council members? Okay, show your feelings. Okay, I've got, I'm gonna roll call me, Chris, Dan, Dennis, and Darren with the thumbs up, and Anna with the thumbs down. So that passes. So, Mary Beth, I hope that's what you need to get going forward on the reallocation for this project. We are now at 5:30, and our next agenda item is for 5:50, which is board appointments. And I'm not sure that our board nominees, applicants, that's the word I was looking for, are here yet. If they are, we can go forward. If not, we will take a break.
We do have Michael Abramson here, and then I think some of the others have also logged on. So, yeah.
Okay, well, if Michael is here, he's our first one up to bat. Michael Abramson is being considered for his appointment to the Historic Landmark Commission. So, Michael, if you are here and want to join us, I see the little triangle of technological death on his tile. So if you're having problems, let me know.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Yeah,
yes.
You can't see me though?
No.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I just need to change my camera setting here.
Not a problem.
Be right with you. Okay, should be able to see me now.
Great. Hi, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, hello everyone.
Michael, why don't you give us a little bit of background on you and yourself and why you're interested in the Historic Landmark Commission?
Sure, so I am a faculty member up at the University of Utah in the School of Architecture. I joined the school back in fall 2018 as kind of a do-it-all teacher. I teach all kinds of things up here for the School of Architecture. I moved here in 2018 from Michigan, where I did my PhD in architectural history. And I've always had an interest in the built environment in general. I was trained as an architect, like a member of the council, as I'm aware. And yeah, I think it's important for us to think carefully about the level and scale of development that's occurring in our city. And I feel the Historic Landmark Commission is a good opportunity for me to share some of my expertise and be able to help everyone do that, to think carefully about it. So.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Council members, any comments or questions for Michael?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Darren.
I just wanted to say hi, Michael. It's good to see you again. It's been
Hi, Darren.
Michael and I actually taught a course together, so I know him to be very qualified for this role. And I think that you'll bring some interesting perspectives to this Historic Landmark Commission.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate that.
Well, Michael, you will be on our consent agenda this evening in
Okay.
our formal meeting. And you do not have to log on and be present, but you are obviously more than welcome to and to join our formal council meeting. But that's where we will be. And thank you so much for deciding to serve on this commission and be serve the city. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you for your time.
Yes. I see Andra. Did I pronounce that correct, Andra?
Close enough. I say Andra, but I'm not very particular about it. I suspect other people will say Andra.
It's my Spanish influence. Andra Gent, thank you for joining us. And Andra is looking to be on our planning commission. So Andra, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this commission?
Sure. So I teach real estate finance and a course called Innovations in Housing Affordability at the University of Utah. I'm brand new to Utah. I came here in June. I'm also academic director of our real estate center. So this is a new position. I think local policies influence one's life an awful lot. I think there's often a need for more expertise at the local level. National politics get a ton of attention, but there's very little you can do to affect them, sadly enough, but there's a lot of things we can do to affect local outcomes. And I guess I have a strong interest in making sure that we have nice places to live in terms of walkability and bikeability, and hopefully less air pollution going forward, hopefully a mix of people of different incomes, that we maintain, that we try to at least mitigate kind of headwinds and affordability in Salt Lake. But those are my main reasons to join. I've lived in a lot of cities. I hope that Salt Lake is the last one. But I have lived in an awful lot of cities. So I think the advantage of this, much like I can talk about, so, you know, I have this new role, and part of it is a bit of a startup for a real estate center. So the advantage of having many jobs is having been able to see how different real estate centers work. This is what I tell people. So I think the same thing in Salt Lake is, like, I've sort of seen a lot of different ways that cities are run, and a lot of different ways that cities kind of policies that cities tried. Of course, I do study these in my academic research as well, sort of the effects of local policies and sort of how income dynamics, there are kind of broader trends at the national level play out at the local level.
Andrew, that sounds amazing. And I love stealing people from other cities. So where was the last city that we stole you from?
Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And actually, I had a very good job at UNC Chapel Hill. It wasn't the most dynamic of towns. I don't think anybody was poorly intentioned. Their transportation infrastructure was a little harder to deal with in terms of adding kind of sidewalks and bike lanes, in part because they have just, you know, when it was built, they're very narrow roads. And so there's a very real trade-off between congestion and increasing other forms of transit. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't a bad place to live, but Salt Lake was a very attractive place when I came and visited it. I really like walkable places, and it's definitely a walkable place.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And I'm also interested in learning more about your course on innovations of affordable housing. So let's grab coffee sometime.
Always happy to.
Remotely, maybe, but
to be clear, it's actually called Innovations in Housing Affordability, and it's a subtle distinction between affordable housing and housing affordability. I think affordable housing, people tend to think, and especially people in the real estate industry, they immediately go to, I'm designing housing for 60% of AMI, so area median income, or I'm designing housing for 80% And usually they're looking for some government supplement
Mhm.
to basically provide some financing for that. And then there's restrictions on who can live in the buildings. So that's kind of what the word affordable housing, people, that's almost a term of art in the industry. Whereas when we talk about housing affordability more generally in terms of reducing rents broadly, and we talk, there's a lot of effects. You know, if you build a new housing development that, you know, let's say they target people who make 100% of AMI or 120% of AMI, it turns out that is also has positive effects in terms of decreasing rents for nearby buildings as well. And so it's kind of there. This is what we call filtering. Is basically that hopefully if we build new housing, the direct occupants are going to be kind of higher income typically for new market rate construction, but it filters down through basically decreasing the pressure on the existing stock to allow some, vacate, it frees up units for lower income households. That's a very long answer to the difference between housing affordability and affordable housing. And we do talk about affordable housing programs in my class. We talk about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We talk about public housing. We talk about LIHTC. We talk about inclusionary zoning, but we take a fairly broad view of housing affordability.
Well, we are lucky to have you. Council members, any questions or comments for Andra? Well, as you heard me tell Michael, you will be on our consent agenda at our formal meeting. You certainly do not have to log on, but we look forward to having you on the Planning Commission. And thank you for your desire to serve the city.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Our next applicant is Amy Burrows, also for the Planning Commission. I did see her tile, so hopefully Amy's with us.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
Good. Do you want to just give us a little background on you and why you're interested in the Planning Commission?
Sure. I'm a straight up Utahn. I've always been one. I've lived in Salt Lake City since college. I'm currently the chair of the community council of my neighborhood, and I think the ADU discussions and the planned community discussions have been kind of the most interesting ones to me. So that's Planning Commission is where those decisions are ultimately made. So I thought that might be a good match. I have a degree in geology and an MBA, and I'm a substitute teacher for the Salt Lake City School District. So I worked as an environmental scientist for the Utah Department of Environmental Quality for just a little while, but mostly I was a banker before my career as the mom. And I did small business lending and real estate lending, construction loan administration. So those are the kinds of things I know. I'm not going to fill I know that at least a couple of the people on the Planning Commission need to be architects and professionals in the industry, which I'm not, but I think I have a lot to learn and I'm willing to do it. So.
I love it. That's wonderful. We need all the perspectives on our commissions and boards possible so that we can be inclusive to all of our ideas and the needs and desires of the city. So thank you so much for wanting to be a part of the city and serve the city in the Planning Commission. Council members, any questions or comments? Dan.
Yes, Amy, thank you very much for volunteering and put your name in the hat. I really appreciate your effort, and I really appreciate all the work you do in the local community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. As you heard my spiel, but I'll give it again. You will be on our consent agenda at 7 o'clock tonight, or well, it'll be later, but our formal meeting starts at 7. You do not have to log in, and we look forward to your service on the Planning Commission. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, council members. Item number 13 is the Utah Inland Port Authority Board. So as everyone is aware, former council member Rogers was serving as the council representative on the Utah Inland Port Board Utah Inland Port Authority Board. And we now need to fill that seat. So similar to how we did this for the vice chair, I will ask for nominations, however you want to do it. And then we will take a vote in the chat, vote to the host, and then whoever who's running the show today. Whoever Tracy is running the show, right? Taylor's running the show today. She will gather those votes and send it to us at Cindy Lou, and then Cindy Lou will go from there. Sorry, that was really convoluted, but you know, there we go. So the nominations are open. You can self-nominate too.
I would nominate Councilmember Ferris to serve on that board.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Mono. I accept that nomination if that's the process we need to go through here.
Sure. Councilmember Ferris, tell us why you would like to be on this board.
Utah's Inland Port Authority is a very big deal in the city, in this region. It is, at least half of it is in the District 2. We are impacted most tremendously by the possibilities that could come to fruition there. There are more railways and freeways in District 2 than any other space. We are more impacted by all of those things. So I definitely feel that it's fair and frankly the right thing to do to have a representative from the west side be a member of the Inland Port, be able to represent our constituents that are most directly impacted.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right, in that case, I don't think that we need to put anything in the chat. We have unanimously selected Dennis as our representative on the UWEPA board.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the vote of confidence and the responsibility that comes with that. Thank you.
You're welcome. The next item is report from the chair and vice chair. I don't have anything, and I don't know that Chris has been like fully voted in as vice chair, so I don't know if you have anything. And then we have report and announcements from the executive director. PS, by the way, we do have a closed session. I am going to give us a break before we go into that closed session, but we will look for a motion. Not yet. I have to see if there's announcements from Cindy and then go into the closed session. So announcements, executive director?
No, thank you.
Okay. In that case, I'll look for a closed motion. I'll look for a motion to enter into a closed session for advice of counsel purposes.
Madam Chair, I move that we go into a closed session for the purpose of receiving advice of counsel.
Second.
I'll roll call this.
Madam Chair, I
Councilmember
think we also need to add, just to cover a second topic, that pending or reasonably imminent litigation.
I would add to that also to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation.
Councilmember Mono, do you still second that motion?
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Wharton, a second by Councilmember Mono. I'll roll call this. Councilmember Valdemoros?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferris?
Yes.
Councilmember Wharton?
Yes.
Councilmember Mono?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
And I am a yes. There is a separate link for the closed session. We will take a break until 6 o'clock and then have everybody come back at 6 o'clock to the closed session.
Council Chair Fowler.
Yes.
Just a question for clarification. Will you be resuming the work session after your closed session?
We will not. We will adjourn our work session at this time. And then after our closed session, we will go to our formal meeting at 7 o'clock.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. See you all at 6.